Alrighty, welcome back to, at long last, some sort of a network hiccup, I think. What was that? Come on now. There it goes, I think. Right. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Fraggoth Reads. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and today, we're going to be doing the final installment of Regenesis, by C.J. Cherryh, Max Headroom is back, and more relevant than ever. I've actually heard the argument, and I almost can't disagree with it, that even if you tried to bring Max Headroom as a concept back, it's like been totally obviated by reality, which has utterly surpassed the zaniness that is that very concept, which is amazing. I would be sorely tempted, if I were the VTubing kind, I would get a Max Headroom head icon, but I am not, so you'll never have to worry about that. Anyway, we're back. This is the final installment of Regenesis, last time on Regenesis, and incidentally, hello, Dunn! Welcome. It has been a long time with no C. Hopefully things are going okay for you. They are going okay for me. So yeah, welcome back, and welcome back to the new, scragglier, hoarser, more stuffed up in the head, and voice maybe half an octave lower due to a combination of whatchamacallit, various layers of different kinds of pollution, long travel, something going on with my sinuses, and maybe one particularly overexcited karaoke night, shall we say. Good times. You know, karaoke bars have a massive selection, but it can be a real chore sorting through the songs they have. And they also never seem to have the one you want. So you make do with what they do. Oh, nice. Congrats, Dunn. That is wonderful. That is very good news. That is top-notch. The best news, I would argue. That's great, man. Happy to hear it. So, last time on Regenesis, Ari, Justin, and Jordan were doing a big collab session where they got all together, and they were like, hey, we're fixing this Kyle AK-36 dude. And it sort of looks like they've managed to do that. Probably. They've gotten in and fordiddled with the deep-set conflicts that he was dealing with. And it looks like that has... I'm just double-checking to make sure they did actually bypass it and do something about it. But they've made it pretty clear that, yes, he was definitely interfered with, and he's kind of been self-coding himself for a while. For your benefit, Dunn, Kyle AK-36 is not an android. He's the next best thing. He is, in fact, an AZI, an AZI, an AZI, which in this setting is basically a test tube people that were grown by this faction in the setting called Union, who were grown to basically boost and bolster their population for a colonization effort. And so they're programmable using tape and hypnosis, which they receive basically from birth. And Kyle AK-36 is one of the OGs. He's an old one from a while back. It's not quite as bad as the genetically engineered slave race it sounds like, though it is absolutely that. Where even one of the key individuals involved in their creation was like, this is not going to be viable long-term at all because of all the ethical problems with it. This is a massive problem, but it has outlasted that individual's lifespan, and now that person's clone replicate, long story, go check out Cytine for details, has taken over. And she has plans of her own. But they do become citizens. Like, it's mandatory that they become citizens at some point. They are bred for different purposes. Some are meant for certain kinds of labor. Some are meant for being in the military, which Kyle is. But it turns out he's basically been what do you call it? A mole this entire time. Not exactly of his own will. So he's been a mole, and the people with the most brain power who know how to fix these things, and because the instructions given to him to program him to be a mole have caused him severe distress, which he's been able to hide and cover up, but it's causing him some problems. So they want to keep him from being a mole without killing him, because they're moderately ethical people. So they are fixing the conflict and making him loyal to them instead, I think. Or just let him make his own decisions, because he's old enough. When I talk about age in this context, it gets a little wonky with event overlap, because you've got, in Union in particular, they've got rejuve treatments, which let them live basically roughly another human lifespan's worth of time, give or take. It fades after one, roughly. So you're getting people who are getting up to like age 140. This gets complicated by relativity a bit, where you've got people who are roaming around on merchanter vessels, and they have ages, if you reckoned them by people living in orbit around a planet, as being very, 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 very long. But they're not. Like, they've only lived however many, like 50 or 60 subjective years on their end. But, like, they'll see multiple generations of people living on space stations, sort of thing. In the case of Rezun, which is on the planet Cytine, which is where we're at now. I'm doing this recap mostly for my benefit, because it's been like a week since I did this, and this is getting me caught up. So to anyone listening, sorry, we're doing it. So when you get to the folks down on Cytine, or in Union, it's a lot of faction names, I know. And sub-faction names and sub-factions. All sorts of fun stuff here. It's complicated. There's a lot going on. So you have people who've been around since the war with the Merchanter Alliance, which is another faction, which you get a fair amount of detail on in the book Down Below Station, also on my channel. Feel free to check that one out. It's really good. You see the formation, in fact, of the Merchanter Alliance there. It's pretty entertaining. So there's been conflict between them, but that's been over for a little while. We're now in what is known colloquially as the Age of Rapprochement. So people are kind of taking a step back, trying to do diplomatic solutions, not conflict solutions. But because of politics, there's some extra things occurring at the moment. All part and parcel with this is basically a big power grab occurring by one of the governmental branches within Union government, the defense branch, i.e. the military, by one Stanislav Khalid, who is head of intelligence within defense. And he has basically gone on a tear assassinating a bunch of people. Some who are direct competitors to his power, to him getting power. He's tried to get himself elected, and it didn't actually work. He didn't win the popular vote, but then he has his opponent assassinated. We're not quite sure how, but he does manage it. Then the person who he would be taking over from basically is like, well, even though he didn't win the popular vote, because he'll be the proxy Counselor of Defense, I'm going to name that person, and it's going to be the guy who definitely didn't assassinate anyone. We're sure he didn't. And so a rival faction, the one that we have the most experience invested in, which is science, which is headed typically by the people working at a super future space lab, not in space but on the planet, called Regenesis, which is where all the Azzi come from, almost all the major scientific research is happening there. Well, they get together, and the current various heads there basically are like, he sees us as a threat, he's going to come for us. And so, as they're wrapping up working on this Kyle AK guy, who has again been a mole for Khalid this entire time, probably, almost definitely, suddenly, where are you? Let's do like the last half a page here. So we get to introduce you to Jordan. Jordan's a guy. He does stuff. He's not very nice, but he's getting gotten back into the fold. Let's see. Here we go. It's all right, she said to Paul, who is a clone companion of Jordan, who we'll talk about in a minute. He could be right, you know, but I hope not. Good night, Paul. Tell him good night. Justin, Grant, Sarah Prang. Justin, you can... The overhead lights flashed. Then the storm siren sounded. There's no weather, Ari said, and then thought of the pile of papers and manuals in the surgery at that back table. The records. Kyle. Our territory, Prang said. We have enough help. Our territory, Prang said. We have enough help. I'll help Petros with the patient. Go! Get her downstairs! Damn, Ari said. And by then, Florian had her one arm and Catelyn had the other. They're both her security. And Prang was headed for the surgery. I'll get the manuals, Justin said, and he and Grant headed out of the room, headed the same direction. Mark and Cherryh, their security guards, close behind them, while the siren howled. Ari, by the way, is an 18-year-old personality clone of the original Ariane Emery, who basically was the biggest mover and shaker in Union for about 100-something years running. Long story short, she's not quite the same. And they had to do in order to get a personality clone or someone who's going to be close to the original, you have to do it the hard way, which means you have to birth a kid and raise them more or less the way they were raised the first go round. That has not been replicated exactly. She, being incredibly brilliant, has theorized that you probably don't have to do it exactly, as with herself as evidence, to be as intelligent as the original product. But her personality is markedly different in a lot of key ways. Namely, that she isn't a narcissistic sociopath. Or at least not as much of one. She's a nice sort, or rather nicer, but when it comes to people attacking people she cares about, she takes no guff, or she takes that personally. Anyway. Sarah, come on, Florian said, and she surrendered. She had to. Florian and Catelyn pulled her out into the hall and down the nearest stairs. They were on the next flight down when something screamed overhead. The walls rattled, and the ground heaved up like a blanket toss. And that was the end of Section 5 of Book 3. They're all in one volume. I'm 90-something% certain that this never got released in separate volumes. I certainly never saw 3 volumes, and I can't find covers for them if they exist. I believe it just got released as one, whereas the original Citeen did have a release that was in 3 separate volumes, but they all came out in pretty short order from what I remember. This is the direct sequel to Cytine, but every edition of Cytine ever since then, ever since like 1994 or 7, has been released in an omnibus format. This is just a single volume right from the get, hence why there's like no cover art for this. Some of what I got is kind of faking it. I had to flesh it out with a bunch of architectural pictures of a vaguely retro-futuristic or a vaguely futuristic-looking building. So with that, we start section 6 and go to the end of the book. I am, again, sorry about the late start, but it is what it is. We will probably wrap up around, I don't know, 2.5 hours from now, I'd guess. And we get down to it. Let me slurp some water and we'll rock and roll. Book. Whoa. Movement noises. More movement noises. I'm sorry. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 1. August 27, 2424. 1927 hours. Gerard blinked, flinched, moved wildly, first at an unprecedented jolt, then at the abrupt cessation of everything in his world. Then the rocking and the sounds started up again, regular as the heartbeat that ruled it, and he and Aban and Seeley all slowly settled and relaxed. They all had something approaching a memory for the first real event they had ever experienced, knit together for the first time in one experience, at one specific age. They couldn't define it, but they had all been in the same situation. They were too old, however, to be seriously inconvenienced by a glitch. They each weighed about 1 kilo, still none of them carrying the weight they needed for that unruly world that had just intruded. They were adding neurons as fast as they could grow them. Their brains were organizing so one day they would be able to remember things. They were packing on body fat, storing it up, not anticipating any other such disturbance, though hormones had surged and they remained unsettled for some unthought reason. They didn't plan. They didn't anticipate. They just did things their DNA told them to do, and right now, with all the nutrients they could get, they just filled out their skins and grew eyelashes, because their DNA said it was time to do that. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 2. August 27, 2424. 2011 hours. The drills in underpopulated Alpha Wing hadn't remotely conveyed the urgency of a populated area or the fear in a gathered crowd who'd felt that shock. They'd possibly had a tower fall. That was the image Justin framed in his mind. One of the big precip towers on the cliff must have come down, and of all the disasters in his life, of all things that had ever happened to him and Grant, that imagination was the worst. Atmospheric breach. Death, if you got caught outside. The planet they're on is not exactly good for human health. Early on, there were efforts to terraform, and then they backed off, because it turns out that the ecology there is what allows you to make drugs that extend your life.
Traffic in the tunnels had slowed to a general milling movement. Slowed and slowed, until they reached a concourse where people, now in one of the most reinforced areas of the system, generally stood about waiting for information, speculating grimly on what had blown up, talking about the inadequacy of the recent drills, wondering about the whereabouts of relatives, and cursing the overloaded communications system, which had flatly shut down all non-official accounts. Mark and Cherryh had kept up with them. They all four had briefcases full of classified papers and the manual they'd rescued. They'd managed that coherent task amid everything else. But they didn't know what had happened up on the surface. Nobody else did, so they made their way generally toward Alpha Wing, with hundreds of other people caught out at restaurants, in residences, working night shift. And, Justin thought, he might get through on Base 1, on his handheld, but he didn't want to make himself a target of questions from everybody else who was missing a relative. They didn't have a place where they could do it in any privacy. "Can you gather anything?" he asked Cherryh, pausing to let those two overtake them. "Is your comm working?" "Just option tracking, sir," Cherryh said. "They aren't saying, except there's an emergency channel and our group's not authorized on it while we're detached, sir. Sirah's security is saying just stay..." Then a familiar young voice said, over the general address, "This is Ariane Emery, in Resume Sec Admin. Defenses have brought down a device on the grounds. There's no significant damage to Resume facilities, just a hole in the ground where it hit. Please stay in the tunnels until in all clear, but it looks as if we're all right for the moment. Section doors will now open, but they may close again if there should be another alarm, so be alert. Upper doors will remain shut for a while yet, so you can't get back home yet anyway. Don't cross a section line once the lights start blinking. Observe the drills and remember, everybody stop moving if the lights flash red. We'll provide further information as we get it. No one is to go outside except authorized agents at the moment. Thank you." Everybody broke out in conversation at once, voices with an undertone of alarm, frustration, and some relief. "Let's get home," Justin said, and they weren't the only ones. A waft of cooler air came through. That was the opening of the section doors that would let them leave the concourse. There began to be a general drift in the crowd, mostly toward the right-hand tunnel. Their own way lay left, and it was thinner traffic over there, a little faster progress. They lost no time clearing the concourse and entering the cross corridor that would take them over to the Wing 1 tunnels. Much less traffic once they were going that direction, which was to be expected, so much of Wing 1 being under construction, but once they got to the Wing 1 concourse, there were faces Justin didn't immediately recognize, and that was entirely surreal. People standing around in the generally dim light the tunnels afforded. Two Justin recognized from news reports as guests in the wing, both standing near the stairs, talking with, of all people, his father and Paul. He could hardly ignore it. "Jordan," Justin said as they joined the group in passing. "Counselors." A nod to Counselor DeFranco, Counselor Chavez. "My son, Justin Warwick," Jordan introduced him, "and Grant, ALX. "Sirah, sir." Justin set down the briefcase and offered a hand in courtesy. Grant did the same. "An honor." "I'd say it's a pleasure," DeFranco said, "except for the circumstances." "Khalid, damn him," Chavez said, "taking this little business up a notch. Probably aiming at the airport, maybe at the media people, or us. This is getting damned serious." "A crazy universe," Jordan said, and put a hand on Justin's shoulder, just a little unfriendly pressure of the fingers that said he was, at the moment, as welcome as the plague. "Here we are expecting the rest of the council, and Vladislav Khalid casts an early vote. I don't think it's going to win him friends." Jordan said, "Ooh. Where are we?" "I've got to get back to Alpha Wing," Justin said. "You aren't going anywhere until they open the upstairs doors," Jordan said. "I've got a responsibility next door, and 20 kilos of records to stow. I'll at least get through to the tunnel." "My talented son," Jordan said, and let him go. Jordan Warwick's What's a nice way to put this? He's a hemorrhoidal asshole, actually, is what he is. He's a royal bastard. He's a pain in the ass. Justin is his clone, but not a personality clone. There are reasons why he isn't a successful personality clone, and most of those reasons boil down to Jordan being a control freak and not wanting anybody to compete with him. It's complicated. "My talented son," Jordan said, and let him go. He went. He picked up his briefcase, gathered up Grant and Mark and Cherryh without a word, and went into the nook that separated Alpha Wing. "Try the key," he asked Grant, not even looking back, and to his vast relief it did work, and let them through, out of Jordan's vicinity. It let them through at least as far as the guard station and 2 others of Mark's and Cherryh's unit. "Can I possibly get upstairs?" he asked. "Keycard will actually override, sir," one said, "but it's advised you stay below. We don't know that that's the last that will come in. Best to go into the safety tunnel, sir. Anyone you're looking for is probably there." Nothing sensible to do, then, but go aside, down the ramp to the deeper fortification, where, in fact, everyone else had gone. There was a bank of chairs, a galley, an auxiliary command post, quite a few of Ari's staff out and about. Maddie Strassen, Tommy and Mika, they were there. Wes and Marco were busy at the command post. "We're all right," Justin said to Mark and Cherryh, and walked into the command post alcove to set down the heavy briefcase. "Wes, Marco, these belong to Ari." "Thank you, sir," Wes said. "What have we got out there?" Monitors were active. There was a large one above the console. Wes moved a hand, and that one went live. It didn't make sense for a moment. A floodlit area in the dark beside a white strip that appeared to be part of a road. A lot of twisted metal lit against the night. "That's the airport road," Grant murmured. Then the scale made sense. The twisted metal, a small plane maybe, but large enough to make a hell of a hole. It was surreal. The crater and that wreckage beside the main road, right near the streetlight. It was tilted. Outraged bots were scurrying along the perimeter, never coming closer. A handful of hazard-suited figures were out there, in the shadows. That it hadn't hit any building when it had come down had been, Justin thought, their supreme good luck. The crater was, damn it, right near the hospital. "What is it?" he asked. "What was it?" "Missile," Wes said, and Marco, "Seems to be out of Svetlansk. There's a defense base up there." "God," he said, "they're crazy." And then he thought that Mark and Cherryh might have had training that enabled them to accept explosions as part of the environment, but that Grant certainly hadn't. Justin took hold of Grant's arm. "Are you all right with this?" he asked. "I'm not sure I ever quite expected things falling on the ground," Grant said in his best attempt at levity. "I think I'm doing all right. It's like being shot at, isn't it?" "I think it's a little worse than that," he said. It was worse for everybody. "Come on, leave the briefcases here. Mark, Cherryh, you're on your own." He walked with Grant just outside the alcove and ran into Maddie. "Any news?" Maddie asked. "Not much, except it may be a missile," he said quietly. "Is there coffee?" "In the galley. Staff will get it. Sandwiches if you want 'em." "Thanks," he said. His stomach didn't want food, but a drink of something hot was more attractive. He and Grant walked on toward the galley. It didn't even get close before one of Ari's staff, Dell it was, presented them a choice of juices and sweet rolls. Juice, he decided. Grant took one too, and they went and had a seat at the galley tables, which had been let down from the wall. There was a news monitor nearby, people talking into the camera, a low, steady sound. "I think they just wanted to take a tower down," he said, "just like upriver. They wanted to scare us." "Well, they've certainly done that," Grant said over a sip of juice. "What are the chances of another one, I wonder?" "I don't know," he said, which was the truth. "Racing defenses will get it." a young voice said, and Tommy Carnath arrived with his sister, settling near them. Likewise with Juice. If they come near the towers and they're not aircraft, they'll knock them down. Not saying what they'll fall on, Justin thought unhappily, but, considering Grant, he kept that observation to himself. Attention! The vid changed abruptly. Ari was suddenly on camera, not with the news, but somewhere else, somewhere office-like. We've identified the object as an I-82 air-to-ground missile, serial number 38298, which did detonate conventional explosives. It came from the military base at Svetlansk. It fell in the green space between the airport and the warehouses, and it is no longer a threat. We have the following statement. Regenesis asks why any defense installation on Cytine is in possession of such armament and what enemy they anticipate to exist on this planet. Regenesis asks who authorized its import and storage. Regenesis asks who targeted it at a sovereign administrative territory where only Union civilians are present. Regenesis calls on the Council Office of Inquiry to ask these questions where appropriate and to relay their findings to the Council of Nine and the Council of Worlds. The citizens of Regenesis call on patriotic members of the Bureau of Defense to consider this event and act immediately to prevent another such attack on the Constitution and the rights of the people of Union. We will interrupt tonight with bulletins only if necessary. Security doors will open at this point. Please proceed to your destinations and remain alert in the event we are not done with alarms. Thank you. Justin finished his drink, put a hand on Grant's shoulder, and said, Well, what do you want to do? Stay here or go up? I leave that to the wisdom of born men, Grant said, and gave him a look that said he really wished he could. Do you think there'll be another? No way to know. I think if they know where that came from, they'll be watching. We'll get an alert. Well, I suppose it's more comfortable upstairs, Grant said. So they went. So did the rest, except part of Ari's staff, who might intend to keep the tunnel facilities active, in case. Ari herself was over in admin now. Justin had no personal doubt, probably in Regenesis or up in... Okay, let's try that again. There was an extra comma there that my brain was like, just ignore it. It's fine. Think it's a period. It's totally okay. Ari herself was over in admin now. Justin had no personal doubt. Probably in... Okay. Ari herself was over in admin now. Justin had no personal doubt. Probably in Regenesis or up in Yanni's office. And she'd put him in charge of Alpha Wing, a charge he took seriously. A little phone inquiry, once they'd gotten into their own apartment, proved Yevgenia Vochkowski was over in admin. So was Patrick Emery. Sam Whiteley was upriver, in his own hotspot, and Amy Carnath was in Novgorod, which was probably the worst place in the world to be at the moment. He checked on Stacy, Dan, and Will, who all returned comm calls after the system had opened up again. So he knew, at least, where all his Alpha Wing residents were. The security office downstairs, where Mark and Cherryh had gone, reported some members out on the grounds assessing damage and reporting to Ari. The rest accounted for as well. So everybody was safe. Everybody he was remotely in charge of was accounted for, and those in charge of him were over in admin, making contact with somebody, he hoped, who could at least have the decency to claim it was an accidental launch. A lie, at least, would be more welcome than a direct challenge. Or maybe some fool had vastly exceeded orders. Vid, coming from the news channels now, showed people, black figures, out by the impact site, under the streetlights. The bots were still scurrying around, probably held from intervening on the site until the investigation was done. A call over to hospital reached Ivanov himself, who said their patient was doing well, and Hicks had opted to stay with him. A good idea, Grant said, and made an executive decision and turned off the vid, which was only repeating, endlessly, all that it had. Justin sat there a moment staring at the screen, just shaken. He wanted things to be right, and safe, and in good order. And damn it, the people in charge of the world weren't acting sane, except Ari, except a handful of counselors who were a long way from the halls of power down in Novgorod. Sharing the shelters with Razun's citizens was what, as helpless as the rest of them. He took out his own comm and called Jordan's apartment, then, reaching a point of resolution to make up at least one point of discord in the world. It rang through, and Grant set a vodka under his hand. He took a sip of it, feeling at least a little calmer, hoping Jordan was.
"Dad, just checking on you. Are you all right over there?"
"Doing fine," Jordan said. "I'm in the process of sending a letter to young Cherryh's office. I want it in writing. I'm clear, absolved. I want it for the court. And I want my damned back pay." Pay is italicized there, so I believe I read that correctly. He didn't know what he thought about the last, but he didn't say so. Leave it to Jordan to think of that. But then...
"Well, good you're all right, Dad. We're back. We're fine. Night."
"Night," Jordan said flatly, and Justin shut down the connection. Damn it, he and Grant sat where they sat, knowing that if defense had its way, Ari would be dead and God knew how long they'd live. But in Jordan's way of thinking, defense was only one among many obstacles to Jordan having his way. Just one more annoying entity he'd dealt with in his life, one more power that didn't give a damn for the rules. So what if defense fired a missile at them? Fine. It missed. Jordan wanted what he was due. Maybe he was tired. Maybe it was just bone-deep exhaustion hammering the last sense out of him. But after all their work over recent days, there ought to have been some sense of winning the round, getting Jordan vindicated. Something. He wished to hell Jordan had some soft, sentimental reaction in his soul, some sort of gratitude for being part of the team effort with Ari, something he could take away with him tonight and feel good about. But back pay, with a bloody great hole in the lawn, and no guarantee there wouldn't be another hole in a significant building before morning, or the whole damned environmental envelope ruptured, ag in ruins, everything contaminated as far as Razun's land ran. Jordan was going to ask Ari for his back pay? He had another sip of the vodka. He called Jordan back, and when Jordan answered, he said,
"You're welcome, Dad. On behalf of myself and Grant and Ari, you're just fucking welcome."
And hung up. When Justin's not getting yanked around by security, his dad is dicking with his life and making his life hell, so this makes it seem like Justin's petty, but this is like the first healthy release of of pettiness that he's had. Like, this is the first healthy release he's had against Jordan in a minute. It's been pretty wild over the course of 2 books to see Justin get to this point where he's willing to talk back to his dad in a significant capacity, in a kind of petty way, as opposed to being like, "You're being completely unreasonable, please stop being unreasonable, please, please, please be reasonable for 5 minutes. But in this case, he's just like, "You know what? You're being an asshole. Stop it. You're welcome. I got you a job, you prick." Anyway, Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 3. August 28, 2424, 0439 hours. Vid worked intermittently. It came on. It went off. They had audio at times. Yanni and Frank did, when they didn't have image on the vid. And they kept it constantly on, a low static hiss for hours of the night, their tie to the outside world. There was a report of a broadcast that had reached some parts of the network, reports of a missile strike that had come in at Razun. The Karnath girl had made a try at finding out. Young Quentin had risked his neck, and more particularly, his lungs, trying to rig an... I see. The Carnath girl had made a try at finding out. Young Quentin had risked his neck, and more particularly his lungs, trying to rig an antenna to get something in from some more distant station that wasn't being interfered with, and they'd still learned nothing more than that. A storm had come in, unmoderated by the towers. Rain had lashed the windows for hours, and they'd lost their watchers for a while, which tempted one to make a move, but Yanni nixed it, on the part of any of their security. It still spat rain, an outside sound which confused itself with static noise from the vid, but Yanni walked with the distinct impression the static had somehow become words, and then he was sure it had. He came out of the bedroom into the sitting room to a white flicker of visual static. In that light, Frank was sitting on the edge of the chair. Yanni didn't ask. He took an adjacent chair and listened. In fitful reception from somewhere, maybe even from the science tower, it was Ari's voice, saying they were unharmed, despite a missile strike designed to hit the reporters at the airport.
"They missed us,"
she said, saying nothing about Razun's defenses. And then a reporter, Yanni was relatively certain, said they were all unharmed, and that Razun had taken measures to protect them. She must be down at the airport. At this hour of the night. Static took over again. They had a few bandit stations that operated intermittently and from non-fixed points in the crisis. This and that bureau, maybe. God knew what. They didn't use call signs.
"We don't know," Yanni muttered, "how much of this the opposition intends we get. I don't entirely trust the transmission."
Frank nodded agreement. They were both short of sleep. There was constant harassment, maneuvering of agents around the building, communications that came and went. They hadn't heard from Lynch, and were supposed to have heard. At the moment, Yanni didn't know whether he was still proxy counselor or counselor for science, whether Lynch was still alive or as dead as Sperlin and probably Jacques and probably Lau by now, give or take the mechanical support that reportedly sustained her. They'd done all they could. They'd sent messages. Bogdanovich, son of the late counselor for state, and proxy for the current one, Harad, had headed... Oh, that's what commas mean, my man. This is just CJ Cherryh being difficult, and we're okay with this, as I've established repeatedly. I think it should be mandatory reading. Well, okay, so that gives mixed messages, I guess, to students trying to learn proper grammar in English, but you should absolutely be teaching at least one CJ Cherryh book. So it's like, okay, so we've taught you how to be rigid about how grammar works. Now let's show you how you can kind of play around with that and get your meaning across anyway. And also use every single part of the punctuation buffalo. Okay, there's no interrobang. But she doesn't really do statements like that. Interrobangs, if memory serves, are the question mark, exclamation point, unified punctuation. Nobody actually uses those for reasons. Namely that you'd have to find a key to put it on a keyboard. Or look for it. It's faster to just type exclamation point, question mark, or vice versa. Anyway, where were we before I made yap noises? Oh, right, I was correcting myself. They'd done all they could. They'd sent messages. Bogdanovich, son of the late counselor for state and proxy for the current one, Harad, had headed upriver by air. Then Harad himself had gone, or was supposed to have gone, a few hours ago. Last but him and Corain, holed up here in the hotel. Young Bogdanovich carried Corain's proxy as well. Illegal, but Bogdanovich didn't need to show both, they hoped to God, just one of them. The document was signed. The name had yet to be filled in. Could be anybody. Corain's wife. One of his kids. And they hoped not to get to that. A pass by the window showed a sheet of water, nothing of the watchers at the curb. Tempting. Too tempting. Easy to assume they could make a break for it. He hoped Harad had made it. He'd wanted to get Lynch on a plane sometime today, let him get to Razun, because, never mind that Lynch hadn't voted in the office for years, the point was that Lynch could vote if he got to the rest of the council. And if Lynch just quietly disappeared and dropped off the face of the planet, the Proxy for Science couldn't name another proxy. It didn't actually say he couldn't, but there was that pernicious clause, and other powers not specifically named are reserved to the council in special quorum. Which was what it took to seat a new member, too. 8 of the 9. Now there was a gaping great logical defect in a fairly new constitution, wasn't it? The founders had been optimists. They usually are. I find that tends to be true. So they're doing okay. They're undergoing, because of this Khalid situation and him doing what he's doing, they are suffering a pretty significant constitutional crisis, if you hadn't twigged to that. So yeah, this is a politics book. Space politics! Let's go! So the meeting was supposed to happen on September 12, but the hours were fast slipping away in which they could still do something. Faster still if Khalid had dared to fire a missile at Rayzun Airport. Planes weren't that safe. Boats on the river wouldn't be if the renegade proxy counselor for defense had given orders to prevent them moving. Not to mention it was a long river with lonely spots where nobody observed what happened. Barge traffic was still snarled with all its concomitant problems, but it was starting to move. A number of enterprising citizens had gotten together and cleared a warehouse by taking foodstuffs and distributing them to all comers, so there was room to offload an incoming barge or two. Barges had gone out yesterday, but things were getting increasingly desperate in the city. And the mayor was ordering the police to take action to get dock workers to the docks, failing which he threatened to hire any applicant to take the jobs. That wasn't going to be popular with the dock workers. Fact was, a city could only take so much disorder before things began to break, and patience was the first thing to go. A rap came at his door. A rap came at his door. Frank got up from the chair and drew a gun that was very rarely in evidence. Yanni went to the door, flicked on the outside vid, and opened it fast. It was Amy Carnath and Quentin behind her.
"Sir," the girl said, "Quentin thinks we should move. They're not out there."
"Trap," Frank said.
"When is it going to be better?"
Amy asked, which was a good question, in Yanni's estimation.
"We go over to the hotel behind us. Frank and Quentin get the cars, and 2 other cars go out front, while they go around the block, and we go straight over the bridge, and then we all just go hard as we can for the airport."
Planes aren't safe, Yanni said. They're shooting missiles lately.
"Boats are slower," she said.
She was a gawky kid. She'd begun to grow into the lanky, large-eyed height, but at the moment she looked her youth, scared, but willing to try any damned thing, possibly because she didn't adequately imagine failing.
Quentin and I will do it. We'll get the car to the front, if you and Frank can get Counselor Corain to the curb."
Hell, he said. I've got files to wipe. I'm not ready for this.
"She has a point," Frank said suddenly. "Make a feint toward State. 2 cars that way. 2 more toward Lynch. 1 car gets us all to the airport."
"We only have 4 cars," Yanni said, and the hotel bus.
"Wouldn't use it at the moment," Frank said, "or the cars they know. We take the executive car from the next building's garage. Safer."
"You're agreeing with this,"
Yanni said. "The missile strike," Frank said, "argues they're fast losing their inhibitions. They're feeling omnipotent. That, or something's made them desperate." Yanni cast a glance at the Carnath girl, said, "Stand there," and went to the bedroom and threw on what he'd been wearing, casuals, 2 tees under a sweater. His coat was going to be no protection against the chill. When the weather got like this upriver, they headed for the storm tunnels. To do what they proposed to do, they'd have to hold their breath and make a dash for it through open space in the alley, trusting the downpour to wash noxious life down the gutters, this far in among city towers. Building connected to building by overhangs spanning some of the alley, but it was sloppy and cold out there. He came back to the main room and started putting on the coat.
"Frank, what do we do?"
5 minutes for me to brief Jack and Carl. You get Corain out of bed and get downstairs.
Got it, he said.
Quentin, you take the south stairs. Meet you at the back door.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Quentin said. I don't remember what voice I had for Quentin. He's had, like, maybe one speaking line before this. Then go, Frank said, and it was just that fast. They were into it. Launched. Yanni looked at his watch, then walked over, picked up the briefcase, and laid a hand on young Amy's shoulder.
Here,
he said to her, getting her attention.
You take the official briefcase.
He had a gun in his own jacket pocket, courtesy of Regenesis. He didn't plan to use it. He never in his life planned to draw it, but he made sure it was there all the same. He heard a quiet flurry exiting the room adjacent, where Regenesis was camped. Whatever orders Frank had given them, they were moving. 3 minutes. Frank and Quentin would be heading for the stairs. 2 minutes. 1. Their guards had left, somewhere. There wasn't a sound anywhere near.
You stay with me,
he told Amy, and waited the precise last seconds before he opened the door. They headed out, then, himself and the kid, out to rouse out Mikhail Corain, if their security moving into position hadn't triggered Armageddon. It hadn't. At least that. They made it down to Corain's door, rapped softly, then louder, and there was a soft stir inside. Yanni stood against the door, trying to look casual.
Mikhail, he said. Mikhail, it's Yanni. Open up.
Corain opened the door, had on only underwear and the shirt he'd slept in. His hair stood on end. He turned an appalled look at young Carnath and started to excuse himself.
We're going,
Yanni said, catching Corain's arm.
Get dressed, now.
Corain just nodded, looked anxiously at Amy Carnath, then grabbed his pants off the fat armchair and pulled them on. Shoes, he said, searching.
Here.
Here, Amy said, and he found them and grabbed his coat. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else but the coat. Down the hall, then, over blue, figured carpet, to the emergency stairs, the same Frank would have used. Hadn't moved this fast, Yanni thought uneasily, since the day Ari had died. Since he'd gotten the advisement, and he'd known every plan he and Ari had ever made was upended, thrown into jeopardy. Everything since he'd improvised. Like this, like their escape. Granted, they made it. There was a man unconscious at the bottom of the landing. He might be dead. He wasn't hotel staff. He wasn't theirs. He was wearing a rain-spattered coat. God, Corain said. Young Carnath didn't say a thing, just stepped gingerly over the fallen man's leg and held on to the briefcase. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 4. September 4, 2424, 0821 hours. The late Councillor Bogdanovich's son, his sister, and Councillor Harad had made it into Razun Airport together, in an otherwise empty commercial plane out of Mauryville, and took up residence, young Bogdanovich and his sister in vacant apartments in the Ed Wing, Councillor Harad occupying Jordan's old apartment. And beyond that, on following days, things settled back to quiet, much too quiet in Ari's estimation. Hicks had transited from close confinement to medical leave, and Ari had assigned a licensed nurse to be living in, to be sure neither Kyle nor Hicks himself had rejuve issues. If you got supportive treatment fast, so Ivanov had said, you could sometimes prevent a rejuve collapse, so it was important to keep them both under observation while Kyle tried to get his mental bearings and settle down after the shock he'd had. Not least, the nurse had a qualification in psych, and kept an eye out for that kind of problem, too. But Kyle couldn't be questioned as yet. He wasn't up to it. They had that from the nurse. Jordan sent a nice letter saying back pay for the last 2 decades would be greatly appreciated. Ari wrote back saying there might be tax implications he might want to consider regarding a lump sum payment, but she'd start the procedures and pass it on to Yanni when he got there. Yanni. Yanni was her overwhelming worry. Harad had said Yanni was supposed to have left close behind him, and now it was 3 days after Harad had arrived with no Yanni, no word from Amy, who should still be in Novgorod. She'd never understood the phrase, worried sick. Now she did. The last she'd heard, Amy and Quentin had been in Yanni's and Coraine's hotel, and they'd been watched. Nearly under house arrest. She hoped for word from Lynch of science in lieu of Yanni, maybe relaying some word or instruction from Yanni, but that didn't come. What had come, via Harad and Bogdanovich, was the news that Yanni had arranged a diversionary move toward Lynch, but that the crew who'd attempted it had swung back to the hotel with 3 cars cutting them off from that route. And that was that. 3 days since Harad and young Bogdanovich had been here, safe, and there was no Yanni, no Coraine, no Amy, not a ripple out of Razunsek in Novgorod, and Amy didn't answer Maddie's discreet personal call. The situation sent her back to Base 1 to make sure she understood the constitutional scenario if there was a near-majority vote, and there should be a council seat vacated by disaster. Dicey was what it seemed to her. There was a procedure by which the remaining councillors could unanimously declare a bureau seat could not be filled within the likely span of an emergency, but the sticky point was that, quote, remaining councillors, unquote, had to include Khalid, who naturally wouldn't vote to unseat himself. Except he hadn't gotten seated, not officially, and needed a majority of living councillors to be seated. That was an interesting point of law, but it was also a real kink in the situation for Khalid. He'd alienated everybody. He was on a collision course with constitutional law, and that wasn't a major point with most CITs who didn't understand it, but it was a nasty situation for Khalid on the one hand, and for the Constitution on the other. You could think it's just a document, she wrote to her successor in the small hours of the morning, but it's more. It represents a real point of consensus we haven't got now, and a lot of people were willing to give up things they wanted so they could get that agreement. It was a point in human history where all of Union agreed to a set of priorities, and now we'll either prove that agreement still binds everybody, or we'll prove somebody with enough guns can run everything at any given moment, and that means no peace, even for them. I never got excited about studying law, until we are a few missile launches away from not having any law at all. We've got to get that consensus back. That means we've got to be able to tell people the Constitution still works, and make them believe it. That's why the forms matter. People have to see things done by the rules. We've got to make people feel safe again, and make them believe that compromises are going to be binding. Unfortunately, people in Khalid's own bureau haven't done anything to stop him. His bureau was taking his orders, or, at least, took them far enough to launch that missile. There hasn't been another. Maybe that means that's all they had, or all they can get to. Maybe it means it even shocked people in defense. It should have. I hope it did. She put in a once-a-day meeting with the reporters at the airport, who said the broadcasts were having a lot of trouble getting out at Novgorod, and they weren't sure about Planis, but they were still getting out intermittently there and fairly consistently in other places. People were sending bits all over the net, and Defense was trying to block it, but Defense couldn't stop what other bureaus ran. So that was doing some good. She tried to improve her sleep patterns. She still found herself awake at night and napping on her arms on her desk, after being up at 0500 hours. She finally took her proper bed in the thought that if she could sleep at all, at any time, she ought to, no matter what else was going on in the world, and no matter how worried she was about Yanni. But she wouldn't take a sleeping pill. She'd just about gotten to that nowhere state, all the same, when Florian's voice said, Sirrah, forgive me, but there's a report Defense has just moved in on Planis. They've shut down all communication. We terminated accesses. Damn, she thought. But she wasn't wholly surprised. And she had no doubt they'd be after whatever they could get. library, all of it. But they hadn't likely gotten anything. System had taken measures that fast. They had it set up for Planus, for particular operations inside Razun, for Strassenberg, for Razun-Sec offices in Novgorod. One system-level irregularity, and System needed to be reset from Razun admin. One code out of base 1, and it nuked accesses at any other given base until codes were reset. That had happened, probably at the first probe they made into System. She was ahead of them that far. She shoved herself up on one arm and the other, and found the edge of the bed, raking hair out of her eyes and trying simultaneously to ask herself if there was any other thing she needed to think of, or if they'd just lost Planus. There wasn't anything to do, was there? They'd known they could lose it that fast because a defense installation was snuggled up against it, and defense installations had guns and a lot of electronics, and they'd probably spent years preparing themselves to crack System. That part hadn't worked. She felt good about that. "Tell admin," she said, and Florian called Catelyn on comm and told her to tell Chloe, while Ari was pulling on her boots. "Tell the counselors," she added. That was a new priority on their notifications list, but they kept the council, such as it was, as informed as admin, where it regarded moves by defense. "I'll be over there. I'll go talk to the reporters. I'll take calls from anybody on the notify list." She took a twist in her hair and jammed the skewer in slantwise, which hurt, but she was in a hurry. Casual reminder that as of like a couple weeks ago, she almost definitely had a concussion, and it has remained, I think, largely undiagnosed. Headaches and nausea have been happening for her. They haven't mentioned that lately, but the hurting at the back of her head, where she does up her hair, has been kind of a subtle reminder that, hey, by the way, she is hurt, actually, from some action that occurred earlier. She took a twist in her hair and jammed the skewer in slantwise, which hurt, but she was in a hurry. Joyce showed up. "Coat," Ari said, "please." And, "Florian, how did they do it?" There were already defense personnel inside the labs. 50 more defense personnel arrived about midnight local. They took on possession of the administrative offices, and that was that. Most people go off shift at 1600. "Anyone hurt?" Razun's second uniform were roughed up, Florian said as they entered the hall. Joyce brought the coat, and Ari turned and slipped it on. "That's the last information we have. It may have gotten worse, but they have their standing orders. Go to plainclothes, offer no resistance, destroy any records you can." Those were the instructions. Physical records they've undoubtedly got. Undoubtedly some manuals. And the prior codes. They'll be going over those with every expert they have. Looking for some forgotten app they can still get into. They won't find one. "Good. Then that's gone by the book." They reached the front door, and Theo let them out. "Catelyn is talking with Chloe in admin," Florian said, and then pressed the comm into his ear, intent on something for an instant. He suddenly stopped walking, and nothing distracted Florian. She stopped, there in the hall, among the paintings. "Sirrah," he said, "there's a plane requesting a landing." Her heart leapt up in hope. "It's defense, Sirrah." Florian was still listening. "General Awe, Klaus Awe, requesting permission to land courier jet. Air traffic control requests admin advice." "Permission granted," she said. There was little else they could do. Let automated defenses kick in and start something, or let that plane land. Military courier. If it landed instead of shooting, defense was talking, and talking, that she could do something with, even if it delivered a threat. "How far off?" "How far off?" Florian asked ATC, having relayed her prior instruction, and he reported, 15 minutes, Sirrah." "Get a bus." "Sirrah, it's dangerous." "The airport has tunnels, if they're lying." Her pulse had kicked up, a level of aggression she had to watch in herself and question her own decisions. "If they're going to talk, I'll talk to them." Yes, sirrah, he said, and started relaying that information to Catelyn and then to the transport office, which ran the buses. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 5. September 8, 2424. The bus had gotten 0932 hours. The bus had gotten to the Wing 1 doors by the time they met Catelyn there. Catelyn carrying a rifle/launcher and Florian with only a small pistol. The two exchanged nods, a signal of some kind. The bus door opened, and Ari started to board. Florian interposed an arm between her and the door, saying, "The plane is coming in now, sirrah. Wait a moment." She stopped and stood beside the bus, looking where Florian and Catelyn looked. In a moment she saw a black dot in the east, across the river, coming in on the course most planes from Novgorod used. "Landing to the north," Catelyn said as it banked, and it followed that route, rapidly becoming a distinct, swept-wing shape. "Gear down," Florian noted in some relief, and leapt up to the bus deck in two strides. Ari climbed up, Catelyn behind her. "Field gate," Ari said before she'd done more than grasp a seat back for support. "Onto the field to meet it. Go." The driver said, "Yes, sirrah." And the bus hummed forward and gathered speed down the drive. They veered onto the airport road, and Ari didn't bother sitting down. Neither did Catelyn or Florian, and the bus wasted no time, heading down to the airport road, past where the crater in the lawn had been. Work crews had righted the damaged lamp, earth movers and bots had restored the area and put back sod, so there was very little but the seams in the new sod to say where the missile had been. The warehouses nearby, which had taken some damage, were getting new facing. Those panels were a little brighter than the rest. Rezun didn't admit its wounds. It fixed things, fast, all back to normal. On her orders, for morale. On principle. And if Khalid had something to say and sent some messenger to deliver threats, she'd hear what he had to say. The media could hear it, as far as she was concerned, and it could equally well hear her answer. "The media can come out to the landing area if they want to," she said. "This isn't going to be off the record, whatever it is. We're not playing that game." "Sirrah," Catelyn said, "you know this bus has no cover against what they have." "Rezun itself isn't cover against what they have. If they killed her, if they meant to kill her, it was for one reason. To get a new Rezun administration in charge of a new infant Ari. She sincerely believed it. And to get that, if it was war, Khalid would peel back layers of Rezun until they got what they wanted, with missile after missile, with a landing on that broad, bot-defended shore, and killing anybody in their path. She couldn't win a war only on defense. Not against all the hardware defense commanded. Oh, god damn it, CJ Cherryh, you love me so much. And I love me too, because I nailed that. So that's a pun, a play on words. It's a bit of a giggle there. So the first defense is being on the defensive. The second defense is the political body. Capital D defense. She couldn't win a war only on defense. Not against all the hardware defense commanded. Har, har, har. She got one comm call from Counselor DeFranco as the bus was passing the gate. Likely the landing was being carried on Rezun's operations channel, not kept secret from the population, and she had someone else simultaneously trying to call her, probably Chavez or Harad. Either Florian or Catelyn could have taken that call, but it wasn't the moment to distract them from their contact with Rezunsec. "It's a General Klaus Arwe," she said to DeFranco. "Arwe?" DeFranco sounded surprised. "He hasn't been Khalid's. He hasn't been Khalid's." In a bleak landscape, that was interesting information. "I'm there," she said, because the plane was stopped and opening up, and their bus was pulling into its vicinity. "Call the others, Sirrah. Tell them follow this on the news. I'm there. Got to go." She thumbed off, pocketed the comm, grabbed the seat back for balance as the bus braked. Florian and Catelyn were right with her as she handed her way to the bus steps, with the black, foreign shape of the military craft in the right side windows. At the same moment she stepped down onto the ground, someone was exiting the still pinging plane. One man, then a second, both in plain flight gear. She walked ahead, closing the gap, taking a look at Marine General Awe, white-haired man in the lead, to judge by the collar, lean and not looking like a desk-sitter. He probably had piloted his way in. The man behind him was of lesser rank, carrying nothing but a sidearm, and, a good sign, not touching that. Florian and Catelyn were right behind her. Meanwhile, the media had exited the flat-roofed terminal, a moderate distance away. It could be, I just realized because he's got a German Klaus, it could be Ave. I'm not sure. A-W-E-I. I'm not sure where that hails from, what background. It doesn't really matter. I tend to do accents in the voice of a character's name, but not always, and occasionally I change them. Like I think I had Ludmilla DeFranco as an Italian before, and now she's French for some reason. It's Space Europeans, it's fine. Meanwhile, the media had exited the flat-roofed terminal, a moderate distance away. She was conscious of that onrushing and disorderly humanity in the tail of her eye, but her attention was all for the general, his face, his expressions. His body language exuded dignity, reserve, assessing her, assessing Florian and Catelyn. Not sure, possibly, exactly who she was, or maybe not sure there weren't snipers on the terminal roof. She walked up and held out her hand with absolute assurance. "Ariane Emery," she said. "General Awe, is it?"
Sirrah Emery.
A reciprocal gesture, a large calloused hand that enveloped hers. The man towered over her, over Florian and Catelyn. He was like a living wall, and his hand was warm and strong, force matching her force, no more than that, a sign of basic good sense.
"I'm here for the 3 branches of the service that don't support Admiral Khalid."
Several things immediately occurred to her. That the fleet had run defense since the founding of Union. That fleet leadership had produced Azov, Gorodin, Jacques, Sperlin, and Khalid, none of whom had been straightforward in their dealings with science. And that if another branch of the armed services should seize power in that bureau, it might upend every entrenched structure inside defense as it was. A veritable earthquake. That had value. Disorder, however, and professional revenge-taking posed another kind of hazard. "General," she said warmly. And by now the media had gotten close, and cameras were going. "You're certainly welcome. We just had a missile come close to our hospital."
"No more of those," Awe said. "A force is in Svetlansk as we speak."
That could be good news. Or not. "Admiral Khalid has taken Planis Labs." "Planis Labs," she said bluntly, "as of this hour."
"And he's there," Awe fired right back, "and not in Novgorod. My service holds the port, the airport, the broadcast stations, and the power grid in the capital."
Not hollow wares, then. Bad news out of Planis, but this man had deliberately landed himself where Council was, where the media was, claiming he had Novgorod. And, effectively, he hoped to have Razium, at least in the political sense. "Then you're here to talk to Council," she said. She wouldn't fall into that pit, negotiating in front of cameras, worse, being seen to usurp what Council needed to be involved in. "Urgently so, I'll imagine. Florian, Catelyn, advise admin. Buses up the hill, tell the councillors. Let's go to the terminal, General, if you please. It's a more comfortable premises."
"My pleasure,"
Awe said, and Ari aimed him and his aide and her own to...
"My pleasure,"
Awe said, and Ari aimed him and his aide and her own two right through the ranks of the media. There were immediate questions, and cameras. One question was, "How many troops do you have, General?" Which not even a fool would answer truthfully. And, are you officially challenging Khalid for the seat?" Awe stopped right there and turned a calm stare on the cameras. No fool at all, Ari thought. Nobody who'd be maneuvered by questions like that was fit to hold office. This man was laying his life on the line to take control. And he was smart. Maybe he was a man who wouldn't be at all safe as an ally if the Constitution didn't make the bureaus equal and impose ironclad quorum requirements among the 9. And still watch defense, she thought, both glad and suspicious of a new presence in the game. And she thought, too, in a sub-basement of her mind, let him take on Khalid. Whether he lives or dies trying, we benefit. Awe said in that deep, even voice, addressing the media,
"We demand that the Admiral produce Councillor Jacques alive. We demand that Admiral Khalid answer specific questions from his own service regarding the murder of Councillor Sperling. One dead, one disappeared Councillor for defense. That needs answers. We're not hearing them, and we remind everyone Admiral Khalid has not yet been seated in council."
That was about as blunt as it got. Awe was doing a maneuver and making his own bid for power, doing it on Rezun's soil, no less. It was certainly a nervy try. It went clear to the heart of defense, for certain. She approved of everything she heard, and her blood moved just a little faster. "Rezun agrees with that demand," she said sharply, and cameras refocused on her on the instant. "As of this hour, Admiral Khalid's forces have intruded into Planis Labs onto Rezun territory. Records in Planis, as of this morning, are no longer secure or safe. Within recent months, 2 senior Rezun personnel are dead under questionable circumstances, one of them at Planis, one at Novgorod. Furthermore, we've reinvestigated the charges against Jordan Warwick. We know he was falsely blamed for the death of my predecessor, and we question whether certain records pertinent to that case will exist past this evening in the hands of Admiral Khalid's forces." There was a capper, without claiming anything specific. Let the media digest that one, if Awe thought he could use Rezun Airport for his own stage and not pay rent, even as a friendly. At the moment, Defense has no counselor and no proxy counselor seated among the 9, and Rezun is extremely interested in what you have to say, General. Kingmaker he might intend to be, silver-haired veteran clearly on old-fashioned rejuve. He might be backed by a sizable and formidable division of the service, and maybe he meant to be king himself, disregarding the Constitution as freely as Khalid. On the other hand, Awe was here. Vice Admiral Tanya Bigelow, the candidate for defense proxy that Rezun had backed, hadn't taken the initiative to get up here, if Bigelow was still alive or able to move. That was a fact worth noticing. For proof of any considerable opposition to Khalid's takeover, they had nothing but one plane and a Marine general who had yet to demonstrate what, exactly, he commanded. And if Yanni showed up in the interim, backing Bigelow or some other candidate in defense, there was a potential embarrassment. But she couldn't wait to consult anybody, and there was suddenly a momentum going, where the media was concerned. Khalid had troops inside Planis, which the media couldn't get visuals on, and Rezun had had a missile launched at them out of Svetlansk, which they had been able to get on camera for the whole immediate universe to see. Guess which was more impressed on public awareness. Now this man came screaming in out of the blue with a challenge and an offer, and she could prime the media and shove things into motion. If nothing else, throw a momentary obstacle into Khalid's hitherto cascading rush to power. Kingmaker in defense Awe might be, or not. History was full of actions like Awe's, and some of them died, and some of them fell soon after. The smart ones didn't try to use anybody smarter than they were. Let him figure in the next few hours that was what he had just met. She could support him, if Klaus Awe was smart enough to figure who'd just settled the mantle of legitimacy about his shoulders in front of the media, and whose support could make his survival in his bid just a little more likely than any other claimant. She read people pretty damned well, and Klaus Awe, for all his larger-than-life presence, already knew he was taking a chance. He'd known exactly where media exposure and significant images could be had, and if he was telling the truth, he had control of the Novgorod vid apparatus, which meant word would get out much wider than it had been. He hadn't established himself in Novgorod and tempted counsel into coming back to the capital and appealing to him for rescue, which argued good manners, or suggested his base might be small and fragile down there if it existed at all. Or it could argue he wasn't going to go for political process at all. He was a military man, commanding an organization that moved fast. Forces already in Svetlansk, he'd said, while he was here, taking the publicly political option. He had a real chance if council backed him, and if media simultaneously got the word out. "What's this about Jordan Warwick?" a reporter yelled then, and Ari turned, slowly, solemnly, with the cameras all going and all other questions silent. "What about Jordan Warwick?" the reporter repeated, exactly the side issue she'd wanted. "A covert operation wanted my predecessor dead," she said. "Now the same people would like to see me dead, along with a lot of other people that stand in their way. The general has come here, I gather, driven by conscience, and if it's not proper for Razun to say how defense should manage its internal business, I can at least say I'm in favor of protecting the independence of the bureaus, with respect for other bureaus' territory and property, and the right of all Union citizens to elect a candidate in their bureau and see that candidate live to take office." That created 3 or 4 more questions, about on the level of, "Are you talking about Sperlin, young Sirrah?" Then, more important, a question she wanted. "Have you had any word from the counselor Have you had any word from the counselor for science?" "I hope for it," she shot back, and, seeing the good general was not accustomed to the shouted questions kind of news conference, which was absolutely her element, she made a gesture of invitation toward the terminal. "The counselors are on their way down, or they'll be in touch fairly soon. Wait and we'll give you a news conference." And to Awe alone, "General, there's a private conference room, and I imagine you and your companion would appreciate a cup of coffee at the least." "Coffee," Awe said. It had become a steady march toward the terminal doors. Florian and Catlin's presence meant questioners didn't get that close, or press up against them. The reporters that had covered Razun for years had long since understood that about Razun Sec and Azzy bodyguards. They knew the distance, knew it to an exactitude, and kept it, shoving each other rather than infringing on that imaginary line that triggered armed reaction from security. At the doors, she called back to them almost cheerfully and with real affection. She knew no few of them, had known them for years. "Give me about an hour. I'll talk to you, I promise." So if you're a new listener, you're probably noticing that, life in Razun, at the very least, is very police-statey. You'd be right. It is. It took half an hour for council to get down to the airport. DeFranco and Chavez were the first to arrive, in no more than 10 minutes, if that. Ludmilla DeFranco met them in the conference room, quite forthrightly shook Ave's hand, and asked about conditions in Novgorod. Chavez started to pour himself a cup of coffee and didn't get to carry it back to the table himself. Airport hospitality staff arrived in the room with a far more elaborate and finer coffee service than what the machine provided. They swept recyclable cups aside, poured coffee into fine china, and saw the general and the councilors seated at the conference table with a full choice of cream, sweetener, sugar, spice, and wafers. The same for her, who sat at the far end of the table, and the same for the general's aide, who stayed standing, but who did take a cup of coffee.
"We have order in Novgorod,"
Awe had said, in answer to the former question, which might be an hour-by-hour situation, Ari thought, knowing the conditions that had kept Yanni and Amy pinned down, and she didn't know where they were. They could have gotten loose, could be somewhere in military hands, of either side. Asking Ave, however, was asking a large predator for help. I see. Asking Ave, however, was asking a large predator for help, opened bidding for that help, and she wasn't sure she wanted to do that at this point. "What is your position, General?" DeFranco asked, briskly stirring spice into her coffee, "since, as Councillor Corain said in his report, nothing at this point will induce the Council to seat Admiral Khalid."
"That's not a concern,"
Ave said. Encouraging, Ari thought, but letting the hearer fill in the blanks. She didn't let her eyes dart, didn't give visual cues what she thought, any more than she could help. She signaled to Catelyn and said, very quietly, as Catelyn moved close, "Report on the General," and then listened to Ave and DeFranco exchange several more questions. "What is the situation at Novgorod?" DeFranco asked, then, "besides orderly."
"We're trying to get citizens back to work, which means safety down on the docks and safety for transport moving through the city. In some neighborhoods, that's a problem. We're getting a little resistance from fleet MPs assigned to the docks and elsewhere. We're negotiating that at higher levels. A council directive would go a long way toward improving that situation, which brings us to the specifics. I have a short list of resolutions that we'd like to see passed."
We. Always the undefined we. Ari wished DeFranco would eventually ask who we was. She didn't want to do it. Councillor Hirogo and Councillor Tien showed up at the door at that point, with 4 Rezunsek agents for an escort, 3 men and a woman who likewise took up station with Florian and Catelyn. Ari stood up. The others did. There were more handshakes, more exchanges, politeness with very little substance in the questions. Lastly, Harad came in, state, looking cautious but willing to welcome the general. Coffee all around except Harad, tea for him with cream and sweetener. Ave's aide, who was listening to something, much as Florian and Catelyn were doing, moved close to Ave and said something Ari was sure Rezunsek would manage to pick up. She couldn't hear it. It might just be an advisement to the general that someone was monitoring. It could be business going on elsewhere in the world. "We have a quorum for ordinary business at this point," Harad said. "Shall I chair?" "Seconded," DeFranco murmured. It wasn't strict protocols in Ari's estimation, but nobody objected. Harad asked, "Who's recording?" "I'm sure Rezun is," Tien said wryly, "and probably the good general, but I'll keep notes just for the records." "Those present," Harad said, and they proceeded to an informal roll call, leaving out information, a fact which Ari noted and didn't take in the least as a slight. Where council's quorum stood, the 5 for ordinary business and the 8 for special business, that was something Harad didn't give away for free. They mustered the basic 5 without her, and she didn't say a thing, just sat with her chin on her hand, and trusted records were being kept. "We'll dispense with the reading of the last session's business," Harad said, and proceeded to the general's list, first being a council resolution on the situation on Novgorod docks, requesting the fleet's military police to withdraw to quarters, a second resolution giving General Awe provisional authority to arrest and detain inside the city of Novgorod, a third, council condemnation of the missile attack on Rezun. Nice politics. Ari made a note, signaled Florian, and said, "Give this to DeFranco." And Florian quietly walked to the other end of the table and did that. It suggested a 4th council resolution condemning the intrusion of defense personnel into Rezun administrative territory property at Planis, and requiring the release of all arrested personnel and surrender of all confiscated materials. It took very little arguing of specific language, and her little test And her little test, and probably something at least DeFranco noted, the general quite readily supported it. So it joined the list up for consideration. Then came a fifth prospective council action on Abwe's list, a grant of authority to Abwe with powers of arrest and detention to investigate the death of Councillor-elect Sperlin and the disappearance of current Councillor Jacques. I'm going to reread that, because I stumbled over every third word. Then came a fifth prospective council action on Abwe's list, a grant of authority to Abwe, with powers of arrest and detention to investigate the death of Councillor-elect Sperlin and the disappearance of current Councillor Jacques. It was a simple council directive, but, Chavez noted, operationally unprecedented in scope. They had, Harad said, the Office of Inquiry doing the same. Damn it, Ari thought, pass it. Don't hang us up on territoriality. But she kept her mouth shut. It hadn't made it onto the list yet. Then Ludmilla DeFranco moved for a 20-minute recess. Moved for a 20-minute recess. That, Ari had learned, was where Council intended to do some off-the-record maneuvering. Sarah, Catelyn came to Ari's elbow as Council collectively took a restroom break. Catelyn delivered a set of printout with her standard request, a summation sheet on top. It was Razunsek's answer to her question on Abwe. He had not served in combat, had served at Gehenna during the Alliance Union investigation. Interesting. Had managed the Fargon hospital facility, which was only partially a hospital, and had more to do with the defense base at Eversnow. There was a major caution, considering defense might have killed her predecessor in an as-yet unproven relationship to that project. Abwe could be, she thought uneasily, a worse problem than Khalid, if Abwe were bleh. Sorry, one sec. Abwe could be, she thought uneasily, a worse problem than Khalid, if Abwe was deeply embedded in the cover-up of military activity on that ice ball. She asked herself whether it was a good idea or not to let Abwe know she knew certain things, until they'd gotten maximum good out of Abwe. She'd watched the man across the table, watched his eyes, and she had at least some confidence she was reading him consistently. That was one thing in his favor. But he was also old in his business, knew how to keep his face quiet, and clearly, to her observation at the moment, knew how to talk to counselors who came at him with sharp questions. No fool, not in the least. She'd have about the first instant to read past that considerable skill at not being read if she broached her topic with him. If she didn't, they could possibly have Abwe and his service running defense in fairly short order, unless they first used him to get rid of Khalid and then appointed Bigelow out of the fleet to do things as they'd always been done. Council was certainly capable of doing that, and if Bigelow was more energetic than she'd yet showed, who knew? She might turn up as counselor for defense, and Abwe might be assigned back to Eversnow. He didn't command all the strings that could be pulled. Council hadn't been prepared for the blow that had come against it, an outright campaign of assassination and brute force. Defense had those weapons to use. They could still have one sticky mess on their hands. But she was still the kid, the observer in this meeting. Abwe had had a taste of her style out by the plain, but he might not be totally on his guard against a question coming from her. It had better be a good one. A really good one. She decided on another cup of coffee, and, the serving staff having come back, now that they were in recess, you see, the reason I'm having to redo that one is because mentally I'm like, well, if you're in a little nook or cranny, a recess, that's where you are. If you're in a nook or cranny, you're in a recess. If you're out playing on the playground, or in a break in council meetings, You're in a recess. Yes, I know they're homophones, but I'm doing it deliberately so meaning is not lost. We've also had people hide in nooks and crannies in this, so occasionally that may have popped up. All right. Where were we? She decided on another cup of coffee, and, the serving staff having come back, now that they were in recess, she moved up close to the general, who was standing by the window having his own cup refilled.
General, she said pleasantly, and got his attention, who, in defense, ordered my predecessor killed?
Fast change in the eyes. Muscle twitch. As good as a truther, unless there'd been a psych plant to prevent a reaction. Did he really want to answer that question? He wasn't at all sure.
I don't know, he said, but an investigation might be in order.
He wasn't lying, but he also kept some thought in reserve.
Easy to accuse Khalid, she said. Possibly it would even be accurate.
He couldn't originate that order, young Cherryh.
A little surprising, that answer. Accurate. Maybe trying to shift her eyes higher up. Maybe to Gorodin. But there was more than one way to originate an order, she thought. First, if you were the head of intelligence, you supplied the information behind it, and that made the conclusion obvious. Interesting choice of answers, and she didn't detect guilt in the man, just impatience with her, an awareness of everything going on in the room in which he thought he had much more at stake, and, still, something still in reserve. "You're hiding something," she said, and that got a reaction quick as an explosion, in the tiny muscles of the iris, in the momentary glitch in the neck.
You're a very interesting young woman, Cherryh Emery.
What do you not have that you don't want to let us know about?
He didn't get caught this time. He smiled in a very controlled, patronizing way.
I never met your predecessor. Was she this full of questions?
Something major, she answered her own question. You lack something, and that makes you think you may lose this fight. You're making your move as early as you can and as late as you dare. For one thing, you don't control the fleet, and the fleet has been in power since Union began. You don't think you can pry their hands off that power. You have to worry about assassination for another thing. She was watching his eyes as she ran through that shopping list, and saw reactions that said she was getting closer. And you have about 24 hours to make your bid good, which is why you came here looking for council backing, because all the people currently backing you are going to be in a lot of trouble real soon if you don't gain momentum fast, and you care about that. Good. That makes me feel better.
He looked at her in some disquiet.
And do you have a conclusion to this observation, Cherryh, or is it a fortune-telling act?
Oh, it's not that hard to say. You came here to get a council directive, which will make you look a lot more legitimate. You know there's not a special quorum here, but you do know there's an ordinary quorum, which is enough for a directive. You'd probably like a council resolution to say definitively that there's no way in hell they'll seat Khalid, and they might do that, but I don't think it would look good politically. I'd advise not, if you have that in mind. Better you act as council's enforcement, and then let council get together, vacate the defence seat, and appoint a pro tem, assuming Jacques is dead, which seems fairly likely, or in Khalid's hands as insurance, in which case Jacques can be gotten out alive, and he could appoint you as proxy. He'll do what he's told to do. Am I following this correctly? You've got your troops, you've got a few important people hanging back, waiting to see how this goes, and whether or not you can outmaneuver Khalid, who's just taken the other continent this morning because he's having to jump fast and you caught him a little by surprise. His being there makes logistics a lot more difficult for you to get at him, but you're after Svetlansk, where possibly you can keep him defending. A slow, grim honesty arrived in those same eyes.
Say Svetlansk won't be a problem. Planish, however, is. He's shifted certain of his assets across the water. He has time there. He can politic with a station over our heads. 2 warships up there, if you want the truth.
Razun has assets across the water, she said.
I can get you precise recon at any time you want it. It'll be a snapshot, so only ask for it once, but I can deliver it. He was still for a moment, more than silent. Still, controlled, wary. Then his eyes flicked aside, beyond her, about where Florian and Catelyn would be standing.
Numbers before this morning would be very useful, Cherryh, he said then. Placement of those forces, likewise.
Catelyn, she said, knowing Catelyn and Florian had heard every word, provide the general with that information. Yes, sirrah, Catelyn said. The clock, meanwhile, had reached straight up, and their 20-minute recess was done. While she'd occupied the general, councillors had been discussing, intensely, and now took their seats with a grim look. Ari went up to the table before DeFranco, caught her for a moment for a quiet word before she took her seat. I think he's out here without wider support in defense, except his own branch. He's looking for legitimacy. He's got forces actively moving in or on Svetlansk. The directives he's got will give him momentum, might sway elements of the fleet, but I didn't get that from him, and I don't think he's remotely counting on it. Call on him to support the Council by armed force where needful. Call on all the armed services to support the Council and defend its premises. That happened to be Razium, and they were in extraordinary danger at the moment, with that plane sitting on its runway and unproven actions going on in Svetlansk. DeFranco nodded, walked over, and spoke intensely to Harad, who then spoke at some length to Harogo. And Harogo, once they were seated, made the motion to consider an amendment to the last proposed directive. They passed the Council directive. The added portion read, "Support the Council, defend its premises, and protect the premises of all bureaus, cities, institutions, and territories by force of arms where need be." Awe drew in a large breath, then, satisfied, it seemed. "Sirrah," Florian said. He'd left the room during the last of the session. He had a printout in hand and handed it to her. "The Planus report." It was a single page. It gave a breakdown of defense numbers at the airport, numbers inside Planus. "That's of this morning, Sirrah. At the point we shut system down." "Good," she said. "As far as we know, system remains intact?"
"Likely it does."
It was earnest of what they could get when they needed it. She went to the general, who was taking leave of the councillors, and handed him the paper. Numbers and locations of non-Razian individuals, the hour of the takeover. You get Khalid to defend his airport and his base, and let us know when you need it, sir. Awe looked past Ari, directly at Catelyn and Florian, whose faces wouldn't give him a thing. And back to her, maybe wanting to know a lot more, wondering if he had credit enough to ask it. "Right before the shutdown," she said. "Best information we've got."
"Cherryh, resume his air cover while I'm here, but best you get your people in essential operations underground over the next number of hours. We can't defend against what may happen to the station. On the station." Up where the weather makers were, where the atmospheric controls were, and the bulk of the power generation. Not to mention hostile actions from ships that might be in port. She had the picture. Awe turned to the several councillors who wished him well. So did she, and said so, before they took it to the media, outside, and provided the literal text of the resolutions. The resolutions were going onto the airwaves. The whole world was about to know for certain the Council was behind Klaus Awe's actions, past and future. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 6, September 8, 2424, 10:40 .
The first message Justin got said, simply, as a flasher on the corner of the screen of his office computer, "Wing Directors. Red alert is in progress." The second, popping up in quick succession and overlaying it, said, "Justin, you're in charge of Alpha Wing. Call Regenesis if you have to find me." Meanwhile, their office vid, up on the wall, had started rerunning the short news conference on a split screen with the General's plane taking off. It didn't take much imagination to know it was no drill, some threat was imminent, and that meant prepare to head for the tunnels. "Better shut down the office," Justin said, feeling a little queasy. "Damn, we're not getting much outstanding work done at this rate." "Better pack for this one," Grant said. "Trigger the warning on the list."
You know, I hate getting used to this. Yes, fire it off. Our neighbors know the drill better than we do.
He tried to think of what he should pack, what it would take to keep his sanity if it came to several days in the tunnels, and, with no functioning sense of priorities, he gathered up current notes on a non-classified set.
Take a case or two with you, or we'll both go crazy.
"Game, batteries, and motion charger, check," Grant said, "still in the briefcase from the last time. I hate getting used to it, too, just as a useful check on my sensibilities. I distinctly recall being told to appeal to my supervisor if I feel stress coming on."
"Do you?"
Justin asked soberly, turning to look at him. Grant rudely shoved him into motion. "It's a condition of life lately. Move. I want to get upstairs and pack some necessities this time. Let's be practical about this." Mark and Jerry showed up in the open doorway. Word had spread.
"Sir," Jerry said, "an alert's in progress." "We know. Thanks. Get on the comm," Justin said, settling his coat on. "Call everybody in the wing and tell them this is a real alert, if they have any doubt of it. All staff go to the tunnels. Prepare for a stay. When you've done that, supply yourselves out of your office for at least a 3-day stay and report to the storm tunnel."
"Yes, sir," Mark said, and the two of them went off at fair speed, which left them time to get upstairs in good order and pack a bag between them. Grant looked a little overwhelmed as they were leaving, again. He cast a look around the room as if memorizing it, and then looked at Justin with a little sigh, as if to say he was ready for most anything. Grant was Justin's overriding thought. Grant's stability he didn't question. It was a sensible worry whether they could both get through the next few days alive. He didn't know everything they were up against, but the thought of the station in orbit deciding just to flip the switch and shut down the towers until Rezun gave up, or defense landing troops on their very close-in river shore, troops to break into the tunnels and force their way in, that wasn't a prospect he wanted to contemplate. They were Warwick's, Grant no less than he was. No question they'd be targets along with Jordan. They always had been. And there wasn't a damned thing he personally could do about it, but have a short mental list of one bolt hole after another, if it got to that. Planis wasn't theirs this morning. That news had mixed with the news of their landing, and he wasn't the only one who'd be upset with that news. He phoned Jordan on his way down from their apartment. "Dad," he said, when only the message function answered his call, "take this one very seriously. Paul, take care. Both of you." They ended up with the lift all to themselves. Back to the tunnel he'd gotten to know. All the comforts as far as sieges went. And settled in to wait. The galley served modest sandwiches, which Ari's staff said would be available at any time. They had coffee and fruit tea. Tommy and Mika Karnath arrived, exhausted and short of breath, from across the complex, and said they'd been held up a while getting back because they'd had to walk all the way around from labs. They weren't letting people traverse the open spaces. They were too young to rate a seat on the tram, and they were too young to rate a seat on the trams. Yevgenia Vojkowski arrived and said she'd been delayed by a phone call from a cousin in Novgorod asking what had happened, but she had just told her to watch the news. Maddie Strassen came in with her companion Samara and settled in. The news services, broadcasting in Novgorod and visible on the general monitor, showed, intermittent with rebroadcasts of the council news conference and the general's plane taking off, tranquil views of the city, a small amount of traffic moving on the roads, subways running, mostly empty, on a sunny day. It was reassuring to know the city was functioning. It showed barges backed up for days on the river, and then showed one barge leaving, which was promising.
"We have news, sir," Mark said, coming over to him. "Svetlansk Airport has had several aircraft disabled."
"So something's going on up there," Grant commented after. "The general was telling the truth in that much."
"We can hope so,"
Justin said. There were a handful of places of any size in the civilized world, and Svetlansk had always seemed as remote as another world. Since the missile event, it hadn't seemed that remote. It didn't at the moment. An hour later, there was an interruption on the vid to say there was going to be a 3-hour shutdown of the just-opened port of Novgorod due to security concerns. That wasn't good news. Then Ari called in, just on general address.
"This is Ariane Emery. We haven't gotten much news, except there's been a ground attack on Svetlansk Airport, damaging several fleet aircraft. We're getting 2 planes in fairly continual pattern between us and Novgorod, which we think is their origin. We have absolutely nothing reported off the coast in the direction of Planus, and hope to keep it that way."
Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 7. September 8, 2424, 1538 hours.
"There's a small situation at the port of in Novgorod that seems to be a labor issue. Waiting is all we can do at this point. We are limiting our own communications for security reasons. I'll be back in touch when there's news."
Ari shut the mic down. There was a small firefight going on up in Svetlansk as best they could figure, and since that had started, they weren't getting any satellite images out of Cytine Alpha Station. Disturbing as it might be. Okay. Images continued uninterrupted from remote beta, and she hoped it was Alpha making a declaration of neutrality in the immediate situation, and nothing worse, like Alpha taking sides, or Alpha engaged in its own struggle against elements of the fleet up there. Catelyn and Florian, meanwhile, had joined several of Razun-Sek's seniors in organizing a defense of Razun, framed in several contingencies. An invasion from water, from the air, the very low probability of anyone moving in by land after an air landing. Getting down off the cliffs wouldn't be easy. And an assault from air or space, in which case they tucked low and defense became her job, as long as their communications held out, which meant, among other things, keeping a handful of unruly media people under cover. Defense was not something on which the first Ari had had an outstanding lot to say. A search after similar incidents turned up nothing but a few boatloads of abolitionists bent on kidnapping Azzy to, quote, free, unquote, them. Lunatic venture. Nothing like having a missile threat to contend with. They hadn't guarded the boat launch in those days. They hadn't built the coffer dam, the lock system, and the filtration until Gerard and Dennis took over. It turned out being defensive in plans her security was making, but it had been ecological in origin, pushed by the company working remediation in Swigert Bay. Meanwhile, they had planes patrolling the skies, but suddenly had very little information regarding air traffic. The station supplied most of that kind of information, and that provided a major screen for anybody doing anything. She made a try at contacting Alpha Station, ordinarily a matter of picking up the phone. It took a considerable wait, on a line that should have gone straight through to station admin. It still did, finally, at least as far as a live assistant station master. This is Ariane Emery at Regenesis. We're not receiving air traffic information. For all we know, nobody in the world is receiving information. We have a rogue fleet officer in Planis, possibly with missiles under his direction, aimed at the population of Novgorod. Are you willing to take the responsibility when this situation goes to the National Court with criminal charges, sir?
Let me get the station master.
The reply came back, and 5 minutes more of waiting, and she had the Alpha station master. Emil Eriksson was his name, and she effectively repeated what she had just said to the assistant station master, including the bit about personal responsibility and criminal charges. We have no way of sounding an alarm if we get another missile fired at us. We had a missile land within 800 meters of our hospital and 15 meters off a public thoroughfare, sir. Whatever's going on up there, the ordinary citizens of this planet and the Council rely on you for services that mean life and death. Don't give us promises.
We are supporting the atmospheric system and the power grid.
The answer came back.
Fleet assets have just been destroyed or compromised. We are not providing general positional information to enable counterattacks until we have contact with Council.
We appreciate your position, but if you want the Council, sir, you just stay connected. She punched buttons on her pocket comm and rang Ludmilla DeFranco. Sirrah, I have the Alpha Station Master. He needs a Council resolution before he'll provide the global net.
Let me talk to him,
DeFranco said, and she punched more buttons and got 4 more counselors.
We are sitting in shelters here. We are sitting in shelters here,
DeFranco said in some heat.
Having already had 1 missile fired at us by a fool, and if you want a directive, sir, you will have it. This is Harad of State,
Councillor Harad broke in.
The directive already exists, Alpha Station, in our recent instruction to General Awe to defend the Council. Facsimile transmission follows. We direct you turn on current global positioning and traffic data. We'll get you a specific directive on both orders inside 5 minutes, if you have any doubt.
There was a lengthy delay on the other side. Catelyn came to her desk, leaned over, comm pressed firmly into her ear, and said, "Geosats are transmitting again." They had eyes. That had gone all right, hadn't it? Pity they couldn't have been selective, but the system wasn't set up that way. Alpha could shut down satellites from transmission, but once they did transmit, anybody could use the information. And about 40 seconds later, the airport called Regenesis admin.
We have regained image.
Likewise at the port. The outage had lasted about 30 minutes, from the initial action at Svetlansk to the restoration of Geosat transmission. Fleet property had gotten damaged at Svetlansk, no word about personnel. They'd howled in indignation, more than likely. So had the planet immediately involved. Howled, now, and there'd be some consideration of the measures Alpha Station had taken, if she had anything to say about it. There hadn't been civilian planes in the air when the ATC's long vision went out, but there could have been. There hadn't, however, been guidance for more missiles for a bit, either. So it was a toss-up. She couldn't say the Alpha Station Master had been wrong, and he couldn't be in a comfortable position, watching his government come apart, down on the planet, and 2 halves of defense starting shooting at each other. They'd gotten into it step by step. For Alpha Station, there'd been a succession of small, startling shocks, mostly in the last week. So Alpha Station had wanted it stopped. She could understand that. Maybe Khalid would be besieging his own sources up on station, urging fleet authorities up there to shut the Geosats down again to protect his operations at Planis. And maybe Fleet would start agitating on his behalf, or even issuing threats, but Alpha was a power too, a de facto sovereign state like Regenesis territories, and Khalid couldn't trump a council directive. Had him, she did. She shoved back from the console in the admin storm tunnels and spun about to find Florian in the doorway, Florian with a decided grin on his face.
"Yanni," Florian said, "and Councillor Corain.
Amy and Frank and Quentin AQ. They're down at the port. Her heart leapt up. In Novgorod? No, sirrah. At our port, the riverside. Raphael's sending a bus. Are we sure? She asked. Yes, sirrah. She spun the chair about again, and this time punched in every counselor they had resident. They were immediately on the answer: Harad, DeFranco, Chavez, Chien, and, last, Harogo. She said, Yanni and Mikhail Korain have just arrived at the port. Would you like to meet them in admin? Finally, Harad said, and Chavez, about damn time. Hey, that's nice. An AI chatbot says, go get blanking blanked. Banish them to Albany. Get blinkety blanked, son. Time to go full Butlerian. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 8. September 8, 2424, 1621 hours. Directive control stayed in Ari's pocket, literally, via her comm, which she kept on, with admin connected continually. Florian and Catelyn were linked into Raphael's operation, specifically to senior Razun-Sec officers, and to Wes and Marco, who were doing the same, out of Alpha Wing Ops. She was linked to admin, namely Chloe, and the department heads, who'd gotten the heads up from Chloe via Yanni's office. Call Councillor Corain's family, she told Chloe, afterthought, but one she didn't want to omit. Tell them Corain is coming in, but tell them to stay to the tunnels. Immediately after, she headed upstairs and down the long lower hall in admin, in close company with Florian and Catelyn and two of the regular Razun-Sec personnel. The counselors, starting from storm tunnels in Wing 1 and Ed, reported themselves headed over via the cross tunnels, with their aides. They might come upstairs if they insisted. Nobody was going to argue protocols with Harad or DeFranco, or even Corain's wife. All Ari's attention was focused on having Yanni and Corain and Amy across that open space and down in the tunnels as fast as they could get them there, and she listened to the infrequent information from admin, hoping not to hear warnings, hoping the moderate communications traffic hadn't helped the opposition. The bus, at least, was wasting no time. 2 buses, it became evident as she reached the locked doors. One bus veering off to Ed, one coming up toward them. One is a decoy, Florian said, and Catelyn meanwhile called Raphael, signaling the physical lock to be taken off the admin front doors and left off until she sent word they had the party inside. Florian swung a door open. The bus came up under the portico, squealed to a hard stop, and its door flew open. Quentin exited instantly and held up his hands for Amy, who flung herself off the bus. Frank came next, with the briefcase, and held out a hand to steady Yanni coming down. And the third and last CIT was Mikhail Korain, looking to be on his last legs. All of them freshly scrubbed, wearing work blues, still damp from decon and reeking of potent disinfectant. Inside, Florian said. Inside, quickly, sir.
Amy, Yanni,
Ari said, and embraced Amy with one arm and Yanni with the other.
Where have you been?
In the shipping container, Yanni said. Hard on old bones, I'll tell you.
You took a barge all the way up? Only thing we could get to, Amy said, and it got stalled. We're safe. Hid out in sealed cargo shipped for Razun.
She brought candy bars, Yanni said, and water before we tried it. She, bright young woman, had credit chits for the vending machines on the docks. Card use, and they'd have found us. Frank had an arm around him, and Frank didn't look much better. The guards they'd brought moved to provide support, one to Yanni, one to Mikhail Korain. Young Quentin AQ lent a shoulder to Frank, who looked about ready to collapse in his tracks, but who wasn't surrendering the briefcase.
We got boarded, Amy said, and stalled forever while they searched things, but they didn't get down to our container. We've got a medic downstairs,
Ari said, trying to move them on, get the whole party back down to safety. They had a whole clinic. It was part of the admin's storm season. They had a whole clinic. It was part of admin's storm season routine to handle decon or anything else needful, and right now it was 5 water-deprived, underweight refugees. And she wanted them moved, before a dozen reporters dug in down at the airport and managed to get the news out. She started moving Amy along, her arm about her. It was, by the layout of the older buildings, a fair walk back, not to create a people jam near the building. Oh, here we go. It was, by the layout of the older buildings, a fair walk back, not to create a people jam near the building entry in the event of an alert. That had been the theory, but it made a lengthy hike. The lift had made a trip down and back, meanwhile, and brought up Mikhail Korain's wife and 2 Razun-Sec officers. The lady gave a little cry and rushed to embrace her husband. "In, sir, in, quickly," Catelyn said briskly, and got them in. The rest of them found room, and the lift dropped down again, a far reach to the tunnels. Catelyn keyed off the security stop, and it took them straight on down. Doors opened. More security met them, more of Sir Korain's excited family, observing enough of the security line to let them exit the lift before they closed around him. Counselors were right behind. Harad, Tien, DeFranco, Harogo, and Chavez, all there to see with their own eyes. "Medical," Ari said, and Florian called them. Yanni had stumbled on the way down the upstairs hall. Korain had family to buoy him up. Yanni just slumped a little, home and safe, and Ari caught his hand and found it cold. "Yanni," she said, "hold on. Medics are bringing a stretcher."
"No damned way," Yanni said. "Didn't come here to be carried down the damned hall. Harad, how's the vote stand?"
"Special quorum," Harad said, and came and put a light hand on Yanni's shoulder. "Proxy, man. We haven't seen Lynch."
"Harry's already taken," Yanni said hoarsely. If I fall over, deep breath. Justin Warwick's my proxy."
"Is he here?" Harad said. Ari said, "Alpha Wing, I can get him."
"I'm not falling over," Yanni snapped. "Have we got our quorum? Mikhail, damn it, get yourself over here. First business, move to seat Ariane Emery as Counselor for Information, Catherine Lau being deceased. We can do it here in the hallway."
"Second," DeFranco said. "Moved and seconded to seat Ariane Emery for information," Harad said. "Are we recording this?"
"We have a record going," Chavez said.
"Voice vote," Harad said, and the counselors called it out over the confused buzz of the curious and the office workers from admin who'd come to see the commotion.
"Science, aye."
Oh, can I remember who these people are? Who's finance? I don't remember who's for what. So we're going to fake it. I'll use the correct voices, but I don't remember who's what.
"Science, aye."
Industry, aye. Finance, aye. Transportation, aye.
Trade, aye. Internal affairs, aye.
Citizens, aye. That, a hoarse voice from Mikhail Korain. And lastly, deep and strong. Oh, that's Bogdanovich, I think. State, aye. The Council of the Nine welcomes the new Counselor for Information and invites her, officially and figuratively, to take her seat. So ordered this date, the 8th of September, the year 2424. Move to seat Vladislav Khalid, Proxy Counselor for Defense, DeFranco said.
"Second," Yanni said, "for purposes of the vote. Science votes nay."
Industry, nay. Finance, nay.
Transportation, nay.
Trade, nay.
Internal affairs, nay.
There was a brief pause, a gap. Information, nay. Ari said, and immediately after, "Citizens, nay," from Mikhail Korain, and then Harad. "State votes nay. The motion fails. Council will not seat the candidate, and calls on defense to name a new proxy. In the absence and presumed death of Councillor for Defense, the Council calls on death of the Oh my god, let's repeat the line because we're goobers. In the absence and presumed death of the Councillor for Defense, the Council calls on the Secretary for the Bureau of Defense to assume the office of proxy until such time as a duly elected Councillor for Defense may register a proxy for the consideration of the Council of the Nine. So ordered, this date, the 8th of September, the year 2424, in absence... Oh, that's a period, not a comma. Bloody hell. In absence of the appointed proxy for the Bureau of Defense, the Chair of the Council of Nine... The chair for the Council of the Nine declares the defense seat vacant pending elections in that bureau and calls for nominations to be placed before the electorate. None dissenting? So ordered. This date, the 8th of September, the year 2424. The chair moves for the declaration of martial law. Second, Harogo said. Move for declaration of unanimity, all seated members being present. Second, DeFranco said. Any opposed? Harad asked, and read the date. Then, Chair moves to appoint Marine and General Klaus Awe as provisional commander of all Union armed forces to restore order and return control to civil authorities within 48 hours. Second, DeFranco said, and Yanni said, in a hoarse whisper, Science votes high, before his knees buckled, and he began to slip toward the floor. Frank made a grab for him. Ari did. The two Razun Sek Azi were more effective, kept his head from hitting the floor, picked him up, and carried him. The medics that had come up to the area had stopped. The medics that had come up to the area and stopped were equally fast, sliding a gurney into the area. Yanni was on his way to the clinic without ever hitting the Oh my god, come on now. That's cool. It's cool when someone calls and there's just dead silence on the line. I don't know what that was about. Jukebox says, I like to imagine that all the screw-ups reading the legalese are actually happening in universe. Why not? Absolutely. Because one of those is a sentence that's like 6 lines long. Sorry, it's a little shorter than 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. Oh, but there's a 6-liner. Yeah, she likes her long sentences, and Legalese likes long sentences. She being the author. Also, it's easier for me... Funnily enough, it's easier for me to keep going in the same voice when I'm berating myself than it is to switch back to normal voice. I don't know, some wiring thing. The medics that had come up to the area... Seriously?
Give me one more sec here. I'm dealing with something real quick. Minor crisis. Of course. Why wouldn't you? Alrighty, that should do it. My apologies. Where were we? Basically right where we were, I think, before the first one? Sure, why not? Here we go. The medics that had come up to the area and stopped were equally fast. I just completely lost my place. The medics that had come up to the area and stopped were equally fast, sliding a gurney into the area. Yanni was on his way to the clinic without ever hitting the ground, and Ari glanced in that direction and toward the council chair, and knew where the proxy for information had to be. It had cost too much, already, even to wonder. The vote went on. She cast her vote for information, and the vote went past her, and concluded with the chairman's reading of the date. "Are we done, sir?" she asked Harad. "Move to adjourn," Harad said. "Move to adjourn," she said. "Second," DeFranco said. "None opposing, we stand adjourned." "We stand adjourned," Harad said, and meanwhile Chen had taken hold of Mikhail Korane's arm. Chen said, "We'd better get him down there, too." Frank had already gone, staying with Yanni all the way. Ari slipped her arm through Amy's, locked fingers with hers, and stayed to catch Harad as counselors and family members began to move in various directions. "Copy of that vote to the airport, sir? Can Raysoon help?" "We need urgently to transmit the file," Harad said. "Transmission to secure storage. Hall of the Nine, transmit to the media, replication far and fast. Official transmission. All bureau offices, city and district offices, station offices, ships in space." It was official litany, the places that record had to go to. It was official litany, the places that record had to go. She didn't have it memorized, but she said, "Ops can do that, sir. If you go with Catelyn, she'll assist." "Yes, sirrah," Catelyn said, and went off with the council chairman, through a throng of the curious and the concerned. Florian stayed right by Ari's side. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 9, September 8, 2424, 17:15 hours. Pocket comm went off. Jordan, Justin thought, but it wasn't.
"Justin," Ari said, "just so you know, Yanni's back."
"That's great news," he said. "That's great news," he said. He was glad.
He was very glad, and he thumbed the comm over to speaker so Grant could hear. It immediately got Mark and Jerry's attention, and Maddie Strassen's, with,
Just so you know, too, you're proxy counselor for science.
"You're not serious." Stupid thing to say to Ari in the depths of a storm tunnel. "You are serious."
Entirely serious, she said. And Yanni's in the clinic with dehydration and exhaustion, they're telling me, and the council's just voted to unseat Khalid and given a Marine General the go-ahead to go after him, just so you're up to the moment on what's going on.
"Why me?" he asked. It was all good news, if it didn't get another missile aimed at them. "Why not you?"
Because I'm the counselor for information, she said. Yanni and Frank and Councillor Corraine are all in the clinic. So are Amy and Quentin, but she's a lot better than they are, and Quentin's doing fine. Yanni just fell over. The doctors don't know yet what's going on with him.
A pause for breath.
It's going to be a dicey few hours, Justin. It is. But we got the vote through. We're transmitting it. Any minute they'll know it at the port, and they'll know it in Novgorod and up at Alpha and over in Planis. More's the point. That's where we don't know what's going on. That's where we don't know what's going to happen. But I don't know what the basic over there. My God. That's where we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the base over there might have to defend itself, but we're just hoping it doesn't have long-range stuff, so just batten down and hope along with the rest of us. If Council reconvenes, you're going to have to get over here on the run. Are you all right there?
"Fine," he said. "We're all fine."
Good, she said. Good. Take care. Florian says keep your heads down. All of you.
"Proxy counselor," Grant said in amazement. "It gives me another reason to wish Yanni well," he said, and looked around him at a set of young, so very young faces, even the Regenesis agents, dismayed to realize every one of them was looking at him the way he'd always looked at Yanni. It's not so much that Justin hates responsibility, although that's part of it. It's more that he strongly dislikes real-time work, and stressful real-time work at that. He likes stuff that he can do kind of at a remove. So basically, yeah, he's not super thrilled with heavy responsibility, but he's being catapulted from just like some guy who's like not allowed to do much because he's under like security caution to like now possibly a major voice in government. It's over the course of not a very long period of time. like this is pretty quick. So he's struggling a bit. Justin is, I guess, the best way to describe Justin, even though he's effectively a genius, though he doesn't have special genius status legally. He's effectively a genius. He's basically our straight man. Ari is not, even though she's arguably the main protagonist of both Cytine and Regenesis. Co-protagonist with Justin, but he's the closest thing we have to like a normal person's view, even though he's in a decidedly abnormal situation. Ari's just friggin' out there. She's kind of difficult to explain. She's got a lot going on. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 10. September 8, 2424. 1927 hours. A long, long silence prevailed in communications. With the airport, with the city, with the bureaus, and with the station overhead. Not to mention the two aircraft that laced the skies, zigging and zagging, occasionally going down to one plane as one aircraft landed down at Novgorod Airport. Those two planes didn't talk to Razun ATC, and it didn't seem a politic time to be trying to pry into the defense system. Ari just took what she had, which was a fair amount of knowledge she could reach. She wasn't alone in Razun Sec Ops. Amy had come back to sit in the little room and regale her quietly with an account of how they had dodged people trying to track them from the hotel and taken out toward the docks instead. They'd walked the last bit, Amy said, so as not to leave their stolen car too obviously close to the barge they'd picked.
They were moving out a few barges. This stack of containers was ready to load on. It was construction stuff for Rezun, Amy said, sipping juice by tiny, tiny degrees, and with a monitor patch taped to her wrist. So Frank got us into a container, got the door to stay shut while they loaded us on, way down deep in the hold, and later on, when we were running out of air, Quentin shot 3 holes in the plastic and we used one of Yanni's teas for a filter. The medics don't think we got any contamination, being down deep, but they shot us full of stuff in case. And we didn't know defense people would stop us once we got underway and start searching the barge and all. They did, about halfway up the river, but they didn't get to the bottom containers, maybe because they expected us to leave a trail for the sniffers walking aboard, I'm not sure. But we'd come on with the loading machinery. You look awfully tired, Ari. When did you sleep? I'm not sure I remember what that is, she said. She liked hearing Amy's voice near at hand. She wanted to hear from Sam, and they hadn't. She wanted to hear from Awe that his forces weren't losing, wherever they were, and the silence around that operation was thorough. She was supposed to talk to the media. Her security wouldn't let her go down to the airport, but they were going to bring 3 representatives up to admin for the first time to hear a report. And she didn't know where she was going to get the strength to sound as if the momentum of the council action was still going. Yanni was back, and Yanni was doing all right, but they weren't telling him about all the problems. She had Harad and DeFranco to make decisions about the outside world, but meanwhile she had to figure whether to try to make contact with Strassenberg or just let them lie low, and whether to let Tex go up to the babies in the wombs or just leave them on auto. She'd decided in the positive on that, and told them just to be ready to dive for cover. The skies had stayed quiet. Key work. She thought better that way. No verbals. Idiom crept in, imprecise. Even the Base 1 AI wasn't entirely safe, not when it came to sequencing orders. She did it. Amy fell silent. Just watching, maybe interpreting. Amy was all right. She'd been there since childhood, almost the first. Amy didn't know all the tools she had underhand nowadays. Amy could use Base 1's functions, but nobody could quite use Base 1 except her, except Florian and Catelyn, and anybody she let have just one little tag end of a command that Base 1 could execute. Execute was a dangerous word. A meaningful word. She stacked up commands, things to cascade once the first button was pushed, knowing if she got it wrong, she'd expose Rezun agents over in Planis and elsewhere. The whole Planis base Rezun Sec organization was out there for her to use. She could access everything about the agents there, names, numbers, experience, rank, and how deeply embedded. Maybe she should bring up the first Ari. Maybe she should give her a chance to argue with her plan. But she knew the keywords. She knew what Ari had told her. Politics matters. Perception matters. Assassination breeds assassination. War breeds war.
And after all the philosophy, if you have any choice, don't be perceived to have struck first. In going after Rezun, Khalid had given her everything she needed. She pushed a button. She stored the orders, left them waiting in system on this side of the ocean. When the pipeline opened, it would open wide, and the chain would cascade in nanoseconds. An hour later, Catelyn and Florian both lifted their heads from the console. "Awe is calling," Florian said. "He says, 'Now is the time, Sirrah. He needs the data.'" The sequence was prepared. The orders were prepared. They'd probably lose system in Planis once the intruders retaliated. They'd very possibly lose a dozen personnel. Execute. The order went out. Spanned the ocean. Touched off quiet alerts first, Planis Lab staff to take cover, or take action if they were linked into system, and certain ASI staff stayed potentially linked in if they could. System in Planis came all the way up. Took a snapshot. Locked doors. located faces, fired that information off to Rezun and Awe, and sounded the intrusion alert in Planis's hallways, just to create maximum confusion. Ari sat with chin on fist, looking at Planis's readouts. A few went out, quickly extinguished. But the room where a major part of system actually sat was deeply buried, difficult to find. That was what Base 1 said about it. Planis system was a lot like Base 1. Planis system was a lot like Base 1. It moved. It created power-out conditions. It turned out lights. It locked and unlocked doors for a handful of agents whose faces the Planis system knew, individuals who could go like ghosts where they needed to go. Meanwhile, it produced maps for the General and located vehicles, aircraft, personnel whose faces weren't known to system. The intruders figured out they were in trouble. Some eyes went out, some stayed. Florian and Catelyn handled communications as needed. Amy hovered close, watching in total silence. They had found the enemy. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 9. Sorry, Chapter 11. Did I skip a chapter? Did I misname a chapter? I don't remember doing a Chapter 10, but evidently I did. Chapter 11. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 11, September 9, 2424, 1303 hours. It wasn't where Justin had planned to be, not at all where he wanted to be. The council convened in a session open to the media down at Rezun Airport, at the farthest remove from Rezun admin they could manage, as he understood the intent. Appearances. But okay, so let's I hate to do this. I love to do this. I hate to do this. I love to do this. So this is a great example of CJ Cherryh using basically every part of the friggin' buffalo as far as punctuation is concerned. To get across syntactic meaning. Oh, there's no semicolon in this paragraph. Okay, let me get through to the end of this paragraph, and then we'll reread it with everything intact anyway. But things were still all on end. Okay, as in the topsy-turvy. And though Councillor Corraine had managed to get out of his hospital bed and show up for the session, using a chair for the most part, Yanni was having a heart replacement, and was in no shape to take the science seat. Ari was holding the information seat, had been besieged by reporters. It was their bureau she represented, and Catherine Lau's death was officially reported in Novgorod. Yes, she said, she hoped to attend the funeral. So did all the council. I lied, there is a semicolon there. Okay, so we're going to reread that one, while also annotating all of the punctuation used. We do this for CJ Cherryh frequently, semi-frequently, because I think it's important people realize, A, what I'm up against, B, what you can do with these things, and C, how goofy it sounds when you mention punctuation. It wasn't where Justin had planned to be, comma, not at all where he wanted to be, period. The council convened in a session open to the media, comma, down at Rezun Airport, M-. At the farthest remove from Rezun admin they could manage, comma, as he understood the intent, colon, appearances. But, period. But things were still all on end, comma, and though Councillor Corraine had managed to get out of his hospital bed and show up for the session, comma, using a chair for the most part, comma, Yanni was having a heart replacement, comma, and was in no shape to take the science seat, period. Ari was holding the information seat, M-, had been besieged by reporters, colon. It was their bureau she represented, comma, and Catherine Lau's death was officially reported in Novgorod. Colon. Yes, she said, she hoped, comma, yes, comma, she said, comma, she hoped to attend the funeral, semicolon. So did all the council. So you have some idea what I'm having to deal with here in terms of this is how This wouldn't be hard if I practiced these ahead of time, but I absolutely do none of that. I've read this book before, but this is the first time I've had to read it aloud, and the first time I'm seeing that line at all, or that paragraph, in however many years it's been since I last read this. Call it 5. It might actually be longer than that, I'm not totally sure. So now we're going to just reread it and plow on through. We're basically done with this book anyway. Which is kind of crazy, considering, where we're at right now. It's wait a minute, what do you mean we're almost done? It wasn't where Justin had planned to be, not at all where he wanted to be. The council convened in a session open to the media, down at Rezun Airport, at the farthest remove from Rezun admin they could manage, as he understood the intent: appearances. But things were still all on end, and though Councillor Corraine had managed to get out of his hospital bed and show up for the session, using a chair for the most part, Yanni was having a heart replacement, and was in no shape to take the science seat. Ari was holding the information seat, had been besieged by reporters. It was their bureau she represented, and Catherine Lau's death was officially reported in Novgorod. Yes, she said, she hoped to attend the funeral. So did all the council. Justin had his own share. Did he count his appointment permanent? Did he believe Yanni would resume the seat? "I certainly look forward to that, sir," he said, and having found one question he actually could answer, he felt a sort of calm settle over him like a blanket. Standing near the table that served as the official desk, he looked toward Grant, over by the door, caught his eye, and then realized that that was Paul, who just arrived by Grant, right next to young Sam Whiteley, who'd just come in to meet Ari right before the session started. And if Paul was there... Jordan came into the room, quietly, wearing the usual ugly tweed coat, stood there in camouflage. Come to see his son take a council post, or to see his old enemy's replicate take her place on council, or come to raise hell. Justin had no idea. At the moment, Jordan exchanged a quiet word with Paul, and Paul with Grant. Tap of the gavel. Time to settle. Ari had told him he shouldn't sit yet. He had to be seated by a vote. The 8 this afternoon, Ari among them, took their places, and Harad rapped the gavel, possibly even the real gavel, 3 times. I could do better than that. I could do better than that. Much better. Council is in session, Harad said. First item of business is to seat Justin Warwick as proxy for science. Does someone want to make the motion? Moved, Ari said. Seconded, from Mikhail Corraine. That constellation of agreements was a new one. Even a novice on council knew that. All in favor. All opposed. None objecting. Record a unanimous vote. Defense being absent this afternoon. No proxy in attendance. The gavel banged. Second item of business. The Councillor for Information is deceased as of 0300 hours this morning. The proxy for information succeeds automatically to the seat. Bang of the gavel. Third item of business. The proxy councillor for defense is deceased. A strong murmur broke out among the reporters, and the gavel went down again, twice. At 0211 hours on this date, Admiral Vladislav Khalid was discovered dead in a hallway of Planis Labs, along with 4 of his aides. A force of Marines acting directly under the command of General Klaus Awe landed at adjacent Pierce Field and Fleet Command at 0131 hours this morning. And General Awe is en route to Planis, pursuant to Council directives. General Awe will take personal command of operations at and near Pierce, pursuant to the Council directive of the 8th of September, 2424. Understatement, Justin thought. It had been messy, what happened at Planis Labs. They'd gotten the images. And nobody officially knew who had shot Khalid, but Ari had told him privately it had been Rezunsak, and they didn't want any investigation, so science should stand with her if there was any suggestion of it.
There being no councillor present for defence, the chair of the council moves a resolution that if Councillor Jacques does not personally and within 24 hours make contact with council, council will deem that the seat for defence is vacant and that the secretary for defence, Harriman Leontide, what a bitchin' name that is, Harriman Leontide, will serve pending elections in that bureau. The chair has received notice from General Away's office that he has begun a filing for that seat. We will accordingly be holding elections for defense. That was a lengthy process. Notice of filing had to reach all stations, a matter of months, and then anyone at those stations also filing had to communicate that news to reach all stations for everybody's consideration. 3 months for campaigning and the months of voting, not only for defense but also for citizens. Corraine was assuredly going to file to keep his seat, and the man who'd filed against him would have a hard time out-campaigning the long-serving councillor who'd opposed Khalid in Novgorod, stowed away in a cargo container, and left a hospital bed to be here for today's public session in front of the cameras. The opposition wasn't going to top that one. And there to be elections and information. Ari wanted to appoint another proxy and said she had in mind one of the senior reporters who'd been covering Rezun all her life. That man would then file for the seat, file for it, and win, if they were lucky. Rezun had had a lifelong ally in Catherine Lau, and without Lau, they needed an ally to keep the balance on council what it was. Himself, he just hoped Yanni would get through recovery all right. He caught Grant's eye while business proceeded. Didn't quite look at Jordan. Didn't want to give him any encouragement or start anything. But Jordan had showed up, to see his son sit where he had wanted to be. Justin was convinced of it. Book 3, Section 6, Chapter 12. November 24, 2424, 07:45 hours. The tanks changed, contracted, tilted, pushed their contents out onto soft foam. Aban AB and Sealy AS came gently into the world within seconds of each other, were severed from the umbilicals, caught up in Azzy arms, encouraged to draw their first breaths, again within seconds of each other. They were wrapped in soft blankets, hugged in living arms, carried separately to cradles, which, sealed, would speak to them reassuringly and insulate them from all shocks, all stress on their way to the creches. They were not scheduled to meet for years, and then the records would see they did. Gerard slid down into the tray, slid onto foam, a startling sensation, and once the nurses had gotten him free of the umbilical and gotten him breathing, Nellie wiped him vigorously and hugged him. "Character callback, let's go!" She was older, Nellie was, years older than when she'd been Ari's nanny. Ari watched her with a little worry, a little jealousy still. Nellie was sweet, was what she was, just kind and sweet, and loved babies until they got to be older and contrary-minded, and did things Nellie couldn't understand. That was why Uncle Dennis had had to send Nellie away from her, because she'd have driven Nellie into therapy. She worried just a little that Gerard was going to be a handful for Nellie, but Nellie was experienced, no question, and she'd made the assignment herself. Yanni needed the help. Nellie carried Gerard over to Yanni, put the blanket-wrapped bundle into Yanni's arms, and Yanni, thin from his recent ordeal, and ordered not to lift heavy things, took up a hell of a burden, and took it up as gingerly as if it were a ticking bomb, and then moved the blanket to look in its face, and touched it, and was, Ari thought, pretty well committed. Yanni had found arguments against it, but there was nobody better, nobody in all the world who'd know how to keep ahead of Gerard Nye. For the next few months, Nellie would do most of the work. And that was that. Gerard was in the world. He had his CIT number from birth. The law had changed. She was why it had.
He'd be Gerard Nye from this day on, and systems would recognize him, if they weren't locked against him. And they were, thank God, and Base 1. She cast a look at Florian and Catelyn as they fell in with her, on her way out of the labs. "I think we'll walk across," she said. She'd had enough of the tunnels. "It's a sunny day." "You didn't bring enough coats, Sirrah," Florian said. "I won't freeze," she said. There might be a nip in the morning air, weather advisories said so. But the pale sun had warmth still in autumn. They went out in the daylight, under Citeen's morning sky. There was color still in the east, a warm blush of dawn on the cliffs that rimmed Razune, and a gentle breeze was moving. Florian was right. The coat wasn't quite enough, and the chill got through, but that was proof the world was random, and she was alive in it. That was all she asked of the day. And that was Regenesis by C.J. Cherryh, published in 2009. Cover images by Getty Images, Baby and Blue DNA Chain, and Shutterstock, the Red DNA Chain. Believe it or not. I just noticed that in the in the information section. Very nice. So yeah, that's Regenesis, the sequel to Citeen. Yeah, that's a very abrupt ending, as you can probably tell. Very abrupt indeed. Anything salient? Not that I can think of. So far as I'm aware, there is no further sequel to see what's going on with our good friends at Razune. It does feel like this would lead into one, maybe a couple years down the road. I don't know. Let me see just real quick. Just real quick. Oh, I wanted to do her bibliography. There we go. Here we go. Oh wow, she's actually got a bunch of stuff I didn't know was out, because I haven't been paying enough attention. Interestingly, oh yeah, some co-authored with Jane Fancher, who I'm not 1,000% sure she's married to, but I think she might be. Let me double check. Ah, yeah, it is pronounced Cherryh. It says it right there. My gut is telling... Yes, she is married to Jane Fancher. As of 2014. Good for them. Good for them. Anyway, let's just double check here. Nope, there is no sequel as yet to Regenesis. What don't I have here? Let's see, I do now have a copy of the Faded Sun trilogy. I believe I have Wave Without a Shore. Yes, I do. Oh, the Merovingian Knights stuff takes place in the Alliance Union universe? Really? I didn't know that. I have to get those then. I was dimly aware that the Morgaine stories did overlap, but they're separate enough that you can practically... I'm not going to say ignore them, because they're pretty good in and of themselves.
But like, there are ties, but they're happening so far away from, like, Alliance Union shenanigans that you can kind of just be like, oh, these are their own thing. They also do some pretty wild stuff. But yeah, what was the most recent thing she's published? It's probably... Where are you? Oh, she did a Superman novel. How did I miss that? I gotta get a hold of that. Oh, Lois and Clark. She did the novel for Lois and Clark. That's awesome. I cannot think of someone better to do that. That's phenomenal. So I think the most recent that she's done was Alliance Unbound, along with Fancher, in 2024, actually. And it takes place before Down Below Station. And appears to be kind of a sequel, kind of, maybe? To Alliance Rising, which I know I haven't read, which is also a prequel. I'll get around to it eventually. So yeah. I know she's had, like, some recent health scare stuff. Cancer. But as far as I know, she's still kicking, which, you know, fingers crossed that continues. Because I'm a big fan. Yeah, the last blog post she has is from 2024, about another... Well, that's her blog post. She has more recent stuff on her Facebook, but I don't check Facebook regularly. What was another... yeah, it was a breast cancer scare, as I recall. Yeah, there we go. So, she's still around, and that's good, as far as we all know. If that information has changed, I have not heard it. And will be very depressed if it does. Anyway, I've got to go. So I got to figure out what I'm going to do next. Tentatively, I can enunciate my consonants. Tentatively, I will do, because I'm only around until, basically for the next 2 weeks. Actually, it's closer to 3, but I don't know what my schedule is going to be like for next week and the week after. Suffice it to say, I'm only going to be around definitely the next 2 weeks, and then things get really dicey, and then I'm gone for 2 weeks. So tentatively, let's do... I might be able to fit in an entire Greg Egan in that time. But I'd kind of like to do some short stories, and I'm kind of running short on Greg Egan short stories. So let's do a blind reading of the short story collection from MIT Press, More Tales from the Radium Age. We did the first collection, which had a bunch of really cool stuff in it. I'm hoping the second is able to maintain that. That one was also blind read. And thank you, Dunbros, for tuning in, and congratulations. Congratulations. I will have a good day. My schedule for the rest of the week I'll post in the Discord, but should be, I think Thursday's a no-go, but tomorrow and Friday should be okay. What I've got going on Thursday might get switched to Wednesday, so, actually, yeah, no, sorry. It is already done that, as of like an hour ago, and my brain's just only catching up now. Yes, so tomorrow I won't be around, but Thursday, Friday should be a go. Anyway, if anybody wants to get a hold of the stuff that I've posted that had to get taken down due to copyright strikes, you can find that on the Discord. Maybe, possibly, most certainly. So feel free to do that. If you don't like Discord, neither do I. But it is the most convenient format for doing this, for maintaining a community and providing quick links to things without being too exposed. So with that, I'm going to leave you all to it. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Hopefully nobody got their fingers blown off from 4th of July antics. Until next time, toodaloo. I will see you the day after tomorrow, and we'll figure out what we're doing. Bye-bye.